Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Wherever this finds you today, I hope it finds you well. My name is Janet Hoder, and as Senior Communications Specialist for the CGIAR Research Program on Agriculture for Nutrition and Health, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Pathways to Progress, the story of agriculture for nutrition and health and what's next. We're grateful to you for joining us, whether you're here with us live today or watching this recording at a later time. For those of you who are here today, we invite you to participate in this session by asking questions of our speakers and panelists as we move through our agenda. Please use the chat function to do this, and we'll share those with our moderator to bring to their discussions. We have a very full program for you today, so without delay, I'd like to invite Sunita Gadiala, Professor of Global Nutrition at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and Director of the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy, to provide opening remarks. Sunita?
Let me just unmute. Small details. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to this event, Pathways to Progress, the story of agriculture for nutrition and health, and what's next. We, the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy, the ANH Academy, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine are delighted and honored to partner once again with the CGIAR's A4NH program to bring this event to you all. The idea of the ANH Academy, including its name, comes from a very small group of people in 2013, one of them being John McDermott, discussing with Jeff Varga and other colleagues from the UK, Asia, and Africa, the need for a global network to bring together diverse disciplines, sectors, geographies, to learn and share about the emerging research at the intersection of agriculture and nutrition, a nascent topic in 2013. Just a few months down the line in 2013, an opportunity funded by the then DFID and the current FCDO emerged in the form of the program Innovative Methods and Metrics for Agriculture and Nutrition Actions, the IMANA program, led by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, through which we operationalize this vision of the ANH Academy. The ANH Academy is now a global network of almost 6,000 people in approximately 138 countries. Through our journey together with the A4NH colleagues and several other partners from around the world, the ANH Academy has been able to build an interdisciplinary community to share innovative research in agriculture and food systems for improved nutrition and health, stimulate the development and harmonization of new research, help strengthen the capacity of the research community, and facilitate the uptake of robust evidence in policies and programs. In addition to IMANA, which also partners with several groups within the CGIAR, especially in the context of developing innovative methods, metrics, and tools in this field of nutrition-sensitive agriculture and food systems, LSHTM and A4NH collaborations also include cutting-edge work on antimicrobial resistance and infectious diseases, including emerging zoonotic diseases. Our collaboration with the A4NH program is a testimony to how respectful, transparent, and highly impactful partnerships could be built to catalyze global momentum, inspire and stimulate dialogue, and build a big and robust tent where interdisciplinary research can flourish regardless of one's geography or seniority levels. Once again, thank you, A4NH team, for partnering with us for this event and for being such wonderful friends and collaborators over a decade now. We have an exciting event, a watershed moment, to take stock of how far we have come in this last decade, which I argue is very far, and you will agree with me as you go through today's events, and how we approach the next decade, especially at the helm of the UN Food System Summit, and as we go into the Nutrition for Growth Summit, and of course, the big transformation of the CGIAR into one CGIAR. Today's event will no doubt be a riveting one. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. I'd now like to ask John McDermott, Director of A4NH, to offer his opening thoughts. John?
Great, and thank you, Sunita. It's such a pleasure for us to be co-hosting this event with the A&H Academy, and thank you for summarizing our long and very fruitful partnership on that. It's been a great pleasure. Now, the A4NH is finishing up as a 10-year multi-institutional program, and it's really a luxury to have a 10-year program. And that gave us time and resources, great people, to be able to work on problems, to learn over time, to evolve. And we can't tell you everything about what we've done, but we're going to focus on two critical areas today in this seminar. So one is the first question we were asked when we started the program is, what can agriculture actually do to improve nutrition? What do we invest in? What can we do? And you're going to hear from key people that were involved in that, and both the researchers, but as well as people who thought about what should be the investments, who are implementing them. So that's a real pleasure to have that group. Then the second key research topic that we're going to look at is our evolving work on food systems. And this started about 6 years ago, and we decided to focus on how we could support national partners for their food systems transformation, knowing that countries were going to be the ones leading national food systems transformation. And so you're going to get a summary of the kind of work and what we've learned, but you're going to hear from 4 key leaders in each of the 4 focus countries where we focused our efforts in working with national partners. And finally, although we've focused a lot of our discussion on those 2 topics, there are other things that have happened in A4NH. And to add a little bit of spice and just give you a sense of those, we have key researchers involved in that work who are going to give you 2-minute rapid fire to just whet your appetite, and you can find out more going to our website. So we're delighted to have this opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and it's been quite a journey. So thank you, Janet, back to you.
Thanks very much, John. I'd like to ask Imorn Udemkazmali, Board Chair of the International Food Policy Research Institute and member of A4NH's Independent Steering Committee, to offer some opening reflections. Imorn?
Thank you, Janet. Greetings and a warm welcome to you on behalf of the IFPRI Board of Trustees to this symposium in celebration of the A4NH achievements. This research program has been a pride and joy of the board to witness the progress and impact over the years. I am indeed honored to be designated by the board as a member of the Independent Steering Committee from 2019 to 2021, and have been inspired through share and learn with the steering committee and the A4NH members. In the nutrition community, we await the day that agriculture comes to realize its contribution to improve nutrition and health, and A4NH brings this hope to a reality. The high quality performance of this program speaks for itself. I recall my earlier interaction with regional and national agriculture experts. They refer to A4NH and the A&H Academy as the reference and benchmark model to look up to. This makes me very proud. While A4NH program has come to a close, the new windows of opportunity indeed open up to carry forward the knowledge, models, tools, and innovation that will inspire the next generation of research, policies, and programs for years to come. The signatures of A4NH in the CGIAR research strategy and initiatives, the contribution to the UN Food Systems Summit, and the forthcoming Nutrition for Growth Summit will remind the community of the legacy that A4NH left behind. With this, I would like to congratulate and sincerely thank John and all the members and partners of A4NH for their leadership and dedication in this IFPRI-led CRP. All the best and look forward to the symposium. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Imorn, and we're really grateful to you for those comments, and also for to John and to Sunitha for their opening remarks to get us started here. It is indeed an important moment in the trajectory of research in agriculture, nutrition, and health, and research in these critical areas has come a long way over the past 10 years, and today we plan to dive deeper into some of this work, as our opening speakers alluded to. I'd like to welcome our first panel, which will look at nutrition-sensitive agriculture, consider what we have learned about what agriculture can and cannot do for nutrition, and how we've worked with partners to generate and use evidence in this area. Our moderator for this session is Deanna Olney, Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI. Deanna leads A4H research on supporting policies, programs, and enabling action through research. Deanna, thanks so much for being here today, and over to you.
Thanks, Janet. And first I'll introduce the panel. First we'll have Marie Ruel, who's the Director of the Poverty, Health, and Nutrition Division at IFPRI, who will give a presentation to set the stage for this panel, addressing the questions of what agriculture can do for nutrition and how can we work with partners to address these types of issues. And then that will be followed by a panel which consists of Rachel Lambert, a Senior Livelihoods Advisor from FCDO, Rolf Clem, who's the Vice President of Nutrition at Helen Keller International, and Mutinta Hambai, who's the Head of Nutrition, HIV, school-based programs at the East Africa Regional Bureau of the World Food Program. So I'll turn it over to Marie first, and then we will have our panel discussion. Thanks. Over to you, Marie.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today at the end of 10 really good years of A4H. And I'm happy to talk about our learning and the evolution of our thinking about nutrition-sensitive agriculture over this period. So just to mention that when A4H started, IFPRI and others actually had decades of research on agriculture and nutrition. It was not an entirely new topic. And you can see here key names: Per Pinstrup Anderson, Joachim von Braun, and Howdy Buis, for example, and Howdy developed the concept of breeding for nutrition and created Harvest Plus. And in terms of milestones, I just want to mention a few things from the new millennium. In the first decade of the new millennium, there was a lot of interest, a growing interest in agriculture and nutrition and in understanding what agriculture can do for nutrition. And this was shown by the multitude of reviews of the literature that were looking at the few programs actually that had been looking at the impacts of agriculture on nutrition. And there was also the 2011 very successful conference, IFPRI's conference on leveraging agriculture for improved nutrition and health, which was a success, but also brought a very big momentum to the topic. So we, like others, were carrying out our own literature review when A4H started, and we looked at the programs that were evaluated or at the literature. And what we found was similar to what others, not surprisingly, to what other reviews found, that agricultural nutrition programs at the time had documented impacts on a series of underlying determinants of nutrition: livelihoods, income, food security. Some had also measured diet quality and showed impact, and on some aspect also of women's empowerment. But the evidence of impact on nutrition was inconclusive at the time. There was one study from Harvest Plus on vitamin A, orange flesh, sweet potatoes that showed impact. But aside from that, there was very little evidence of impact on, especially on nutritional status of young children. And we, of course, interpreted that this was probably due to weaknesses in both the design, targeting, and implementation of programs. Some programs were just not really designed to address nutrition, but they were looking at whether they had impacts nonetheless. And the evaluations were generally also relatively weak. So what did we do in our decade of A4NH? We started with identifying the pathways of agriculture and nutrition. There have been a lot of efforts to try to understand what are the pathways, and we've all seen spaghetti graphs that had arrows going in all directions, and we tried to simplify and standardize so that implementers could actually use the information and decide which pathways they wanted to follow with their programs when they were designing agriculture and nutrition programs. And this is a guidance document that we produced with Spring and USAID. We also developed, we also helped develop guidance on nutrition sensitive agriculture. It was important to have a guidance document that would explain to different institutions how they can make their programs more nutrition sensitive. What were the key principles that would make an agriculture program nutrition sensitive? But more importantly, what we really did a lot of was to generate evidence working with a nice group of partners in different countries. You can see the names of the partners there and the countries. And what we did was to work very closely with each one of them to design strong agriculture and nutrition programs and to strengthen their implementation, making sure that they were implemented with high quality. And we, of course, conducted randomized trials and really large evaluations of strong programs that were both nutrition and gender sensitive, and also had other components like we tried to emphasize the importance of behavior change communication, water and sanitation when it could be added. And in one country, we added also the distribution of small quantity LNS, lipid-based nutrient supplements, in West Africa, where access to nutritious foods for young children was very limited. We emphasize the importance of targeting the right age groups and of the timing of the implementation of the program so that the children had time to actually benefit from it. And so here are some of our results. This is not just results, this is the synthesis of evidence we did again in 2018. We looked at evidence between 2013 and 17, and there were 17 new papers that had evaluated agriculture for nutrition. So some of them being ours, but others as well. So we found that the programs were much more diverse. The types of agriculture programs that decided to become nutrition sensitive was more diverse. And the evaluation designs were stronger, and so was the implementation. So we had better programs and better evaluations this time. There was greater emphasis on women's empowerment, on behavior change, and on these complementary interventions that I mentioned. And we found impacts on several nutrition outcomes. There was more diversity also in the outcomes that were looked at. We had diet diversity, consumption of nutrient-rich foods, nutrient intake, anemia was measured in a couple of studies in women and children. Weight for height, Z-scores in children and BMI, there were impacts on those as well, and on child morbidity. So a good range of outcomes actually were improved through agriculture. But there were, again, limited impacts on stunting. So our reflection on all of this, and this is very brief, we have on the right side, you see a brief that we published for A4NH. And the summary of our findings really is that we feel that the impacts on stunting are actually really hard to achieve, even with well-designed, well-implemented, and well-evaluated programs. We were finding that programs may have become too complex, especially the ones that we worked with where there were so many things added to make them nutrition sensitive that they were difficult to implement. With the leadership of Jeff Leroy, who started to question stunting as an appropriate indicator, or what's really the meaning of stunting, we also had a bit of cold feet with recommending to use stunting, and you can look at this literature. And so we finally concluded that nutrition-sensitive agriculture should focus on what these programs do best, which is to improve food security, income, diet quality for all household members. There is no reason to focus only on stunting and only on children. Really, these programs can do an awful lot for the household. They have to be carefully tailored to specific contexts, culture, economic, and food environment factors. We saw very nice literature looking at associations that was making it very clear that impacts did depend on the environment in which these programs were operating. And finally, we feel that these programs should be considered as social safety nets. They really can help people in times of crisis and food insecurity, and they should be integrated in larger food system processes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marie. So now we'll open it up to our panel. Mutinta, Rachel, and Rolf, can you come on camera? Great. So we have our first question for the panel, which will be asked to all of our participants. Over the last 10 years, there's been a clear shift from thinking generally about what agriculture can do for nutrition and a focus on whether or not agriculture programs could be used to reduce stunting, to more focused questions around the role of agriculture for improving diets. Have you seen this change in focus in your own organizations? If so, how is this manifested? And I'll turn first to Rachel Lambert from FCDO. Are you with us? There you are.
Yes.
Great,
Thanks,
you.
Deanna. Thanks for that, and thanks for inviting me to speak. I think it's been a real privilege actually to be associated with this sort of journey over a 10-year period. I mean, this has been an area where there have been really concerted investments from what was then DFID and now FCDO to scale up our work quite deliberately in this field. And along with other funders and other partners, I think that's really enabled an evolution of a very significant body of work. And Marie's captured some of the key insights there very well, and a global community of practice. And it's been a very big pillar of what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And I think A4NH in some ways has been a sort of glue at the heart of many of our investments in this area. I think as you've said, kind of 2010, 2013, there was really significant political momentum, came out through UNGA. I think the IFPRI 2020 conference in 2011 was really significant. We then had Nutrition for Growth in 2013. And that really enabled us to build momentum in this area, to raise the profile and the importance of nutrition sensitive interventions, and agriculture as a part of that. And that really drove momentum in research commissioning. For us, a lot of that was built on the early systematic review that looked at the evidence, and as Marie says, showed that we couldn't conclude very much about the impacts of agriculture on nutrition. And a lot of that was due to weak design, poor evaluations or small evaluations, etc. And so there was an explicit intention by DFID and others to scale up our work in this area, to address those evidence gaps in a systematic way and see how we could build a really significant body of work in that area. A4NH was a part of that broader set of research investments, and in some ways sort of had a link into many of the other investments, the kind of complementary investments we've made at the same stage. So we had the global panel on agriculture and food systems for nutrition, was one of the things that was set up at Nutrition for Growth. There was the Lancer program in South Asia, and Nutrition doing work on digital and nutrition, an extensive set of impact studies and work on food safety that we've been co-funding with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then our work on zoonosis and One Health. I think particularly important has been that link to Imana and the ANH Academy, and I think that gives us a global community of practice and a pathway to uptake for the work from A4NH. And I think I particularly like Imorn's reference to that being a sort of that partnership being a benchmark and a model. And it's really helped facilitate a very rapid evolution of the agenda. And we've kind of traced some of the developments in the evidence base at the annual Academy meetings. In the last few years, the food systems framing has been much more prominent in our approach in FCDO. We're really thinking through the food systems implications for income and jobs, for climate and environment, for nutrition and health, and how do we maximize the synergies and minimize the trade-offs across those different priorities. Clearly the agenda has evolved really significantly, and I think for us A4NH has been quite instrumental in that process, helping to frame the shifts, delivering the research, and most recently pulling together some of the tools and metrics and resources that help us unpack the food system and the rapid changes happening there. And working collaboratively with all of those other initiatives has really helped us move the whole area of work on very considerably.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Ralph, the same question to you.
Yeah, well, first, just again, thank you and congratulations really to the A4NH program. It's not easy to create such a big body and network, but I'll tell you, Helen Keller International has benefited much from the partnerships and the skills and the network and the sharing. So congratulations. So to your question about stunting being the focus initially of trying to influence stunting as an outcome, and learning that stunting is, while it is a nutritional status indicator, it's really a marker of deprivation and poverty. And it requires multiple things, not just the food one eats, to shift that in any substantial and measurable way. I guess the thinking was that if you are able to go through multiple pathways, through complex and multi-layered and multi-sectoral interventions, we might shift that needle. But I think we've learned really that stunting is not particularly responsive and really requires a much more environmental changes, not just in one particular domain or factor. So I would say that our organization has definitely thought through what indicators are more responsive to agriculture and gender pathways. And clearly diet remains key in that. And diet is never easy to measure. And in some cases, we measure it too simply. And what we have learned is that you really do need to choose the indicators that are that the interventions are most proximal to. So if one's trying to promote egg consumption, it's also clearly looking at the dietary components that get shifted. An area that also we've been looking at is can you impact income through agricultural pathways? And that's been more of a challenge for us because we think that's an important area, but measuring income and net income has been a real challenge. And I'll finally say that stunting has been imprinted on so many, governments and as an indicator, as have other nutrition status indicators. So we still do measure these indicators, but our expectations of shifting them have really changed. We don't expect them to be influenced so much or so quickly. And so, choosing the indicators that are more responsive to whether it's the agriculture, WASH, or other interventions that are part of this multi-sectoral intervention approach is more critical. Over.
Thanks, Rolf. And lastly, Mutinta, what about from the perspective of WFP?
Yeah, thank you so much, Diana, and good to see familiar faces on the panel. You recall that WFP in 2012 actually had a corporate proof of concept on reduction of stunting, and this proof of concept was meant to influence the way in which WFP would contribute to the discussion around stunting. It was becoming topical and part of that, the indicator for the 2030 agenda. And so during that proof of concept, it was a follow-up to the Lancet 2008-2013. And so we brought a number of high impact interventions together with a view to reduce stunting in that proof of concept project. And clearly, after 3 years of bringing a number of activities together, we were unable to reduce stunting. However, some of the things that we learned from there was, for example, there was some linear growth that happened within the children. We learned that the provision of, for example, water and sanitation, we had an LNS then. It was clear that the occurrence of of acute malnutrition, for example, reduced. But also there was issues of governance around how we reduce stunting, the number of partnerships that we needed to bring forward. However, looking back, and also because the organization moved then around 2016, 2017, to really have a dedicated strategic objective to reduce all forms of malnutrition. It was clear for the organization to make sure that all the different platforms in WFP were contributing to ending all forms of malnutrition and not just stunting. And one of the ways, of course, was through our power of agriculture, particularly around procurement to create that demand and supply for nutrient-dense foods. Also, as well as for influencing the kind of foods that would be supplied, or the kind of foods that we can demand using school feeding as a platform. And so clearly, stunting as an indicator is really, really difficult to achieve, and we could possibly, set ourselves up for failure if we use it as an indicator. But we see that within agriculture procurement, we are able as an organization to influence what kind of foods could be consumed across the different food assistance that we provide. Okay.
Thanks, Matinta. So the next question is to Rolf, and you alluded to this a bit in your first response, but IFPRI and HKI have been able to have a long-term partnership to unpack agriculture, nutrition, and gender linkages, in part thanks to A4NH. And we've used this to refine relevant programs and related research. What are a few of the most important lessons, other than those you've already mentioned, that HKI has learned over the past decade, and how are you using that in your programs? Hey, you're muted, Ralph. Yeah.
Thanks, Diana. First, let me just say that the partnership between a research organization like IFPRI and others that we partnered with, and an implementation organization like Helen Keller, has really been good for us, and hopefully good for IFPRI as well, both in terms of learning, of improving the design of interventions, and really generating evidence. It's also had another side, which I'll dwell on a little bit, but just to talk about what we have learned. Working with multiple sectors at multiple levels has been challenging. They each have different capacities, timeline mandates, management structures, monitoring systems. So I think one has to go in with eyes wide open. The other thing we've realized is it's impossible to implement multiple components simultaneously at multiple levels. Where these things come together, particularly, is at the community or household level. But expecting, multiple changes at once from behaviors, whether it's, selecting particular seeds that get grown, or whether or not to raise and feed poultry, or some issues related to wash behaviors or diet or gender, is really, really not easy to do all at once. And I'll say that what we have learned is providing something tangible, such as seeds, gets people interested, particularly if they're an agricultural or household or community. But that often meant delaying other things, such as the gender interventions, because the need to develop trust, build relationships, and within a research setting, that really limited the time for a very, very important interventions, such as some of the gender transformation pieces. And so there were trade-offs. The other thing is context, and I think Marie mentioned this. In many of the research programs we worked in, we focused just on families with young children. And I think that was a mistake in that we focused on them and gave them the same intervention, independent or irrespective of one, their preference and interest, their time, their access to water. And I think we've been learning that maybe in a research setting that's important. In real life, we need to begin thinking very differently in terms of how these programs work in real life. And let me say, last is competing interests. The focus in many of our work has been in improving the nutrition, the availability and access of nutritionally dense foods. Yet income is a real priority. And not that they're mutually incompatible, but one really has to give and pay attention to both non-farm and on-farm income potential, which I think we gave less attention to. So I'll stop there. Over.
Thanks, Ralph. Mutinta, A4NH has also supported several collaborations between different CGIAR centers and WFP over the past decade. How have these collaborations contributed to the evolution of WFP's thinking in regard to nutrition-sensitive programming?
Yeah, so I think for us, first and foremost, because we are a food organization, it was assumed that we would be able to improve nutrition outcomes. And so having partnered with CGIAR, it was really clear that we needed to have an evidence base for programming in order to create impact. And so when we partnered with IFPRI, we had the global research, one organization which is very prominent in global research, as well as another organization which is humanitarian. It's got a wide reach, and did contribute to nutrition in one way or another through food assistance. However, it was very clear to us that we needed to be to define exactly how we were going to influence nutrition. And so partnering with IFPRI was really something that we felt that provided conceptual clarity on what the pathways might be to improving nutrition. And so that partnership was essential for us. Like I mentioned, the evidence-based programming for impact, we needed to be able to see what are those processes, what are those platforms, and what are some of the indicators that we could use for programming. I think also it was clear that the high level interest at management level was key in terms of how we were able to influence nutrition sensitive programming in the organization. So we had IFPRI participating, and we had ourselves, we had that enshrined in the strategic objectives of the organization, and clearly with a policy that was clear on some of the key aspects, for example, addressing all forms of malnutrition, talking about nutrients, including of other partnerships. So clearly having that enabling environment and an organization that was prominent in research helped to move the agenda within the organization. And of course, there was mutual interest as well. Okay.
Thanks, Mutinta. So turning back to Rachel, FCDO has been a steady and very important supporter of A4NH since its inception, as well as some of the large consortium projects that were included as in A4NH's portfolio. From your point of view, what have been some of the most important lessons learned from the last 10 years? And I think you alluded to some of these in your first comments, but maybe you can highlight a few others that you think are the most important.
Yeah, thanks, Deanna. I kind of answer really as both as a supporter of a range of agriculture and nutrition programs outside of the CG, as well as a funder of the CG as a whole. And I think it's three things. I think firstly, before the development of A4NH, there wasn't a single body or single focus within the CGIAR where the links between agriculture and health could be explored. And A4NH was able to, as one entity, to make a global impact on really important results areas where the centres on their own didn't have that same global presence. And so it was the collective effort across multiple centres, across 15 centres being brought together through the kind of integrative platform of A4NH, which has had that ability to transform the health and nutrition work of the CGIAR as a whole, as has been the case with, I think, some of the other integrative programmes, perhaps in climate and possibly policies and markets. And one example of this is the sort of the benefits to the biofortification programme, and we know that the Harvest Plus programme within A4NH has delivered really significant impacts, and done both that development of new biofortified crops and the delivery piece at scale. I think we've seen this expansion of consumption of biofortified crops over the last 10 years, mainly due to that approach of integrating the development and the delivery piece and using a sort of end-to-end approach, which has enabled Harvest Plus and its partners to tackle bottlenecks across the value chain. And that's been accompanied by robust evaluation and evidence generation. And it's really enabled that kind of targeted focus on particular countries and particular crops, has really laid the groundwork for mainstreaming nutrition into some of the core breeding programs. So Harvest Plus predated A4NH, and some of that could have happened without A4NH, but I think that organising framework of A4NH has helped Harvest Plus see where it fits into those broader policy debates on nutrition and health. And that's been really important in terms of sustainability and legacy of the programmes, both in terms of integration into national and global policy frameworks, as well as that mainstreaming into the breeding. I think the second lesson is the approach that A4NH has taken to sort of integrating science leadership that sits outside of the CGIAR and bringing that in to work with the best of the CGIAR's capabilities. And I think that has been a relatively new approach, and one which has really benefited A4NH, both in terms of quality of science and delivery of development impacts. So bringing in the leadership from Wageningen on food systems and from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine on human health, it's that integration of science leadership from outside of the CG in conjunction with CG expertise has been really instrumental. And finally, I think we've touched already on that interdisciplinarity of research, which has been so critical in tackling broader questions of public health impacts through food safety and nutrition, and has been really necessary and has been picked up actually through the annual ANH Academy Week as in replicating that kind of really genuinely interdisciplinary network.
Thanks, Rachel. That's great. I think we'll move now to, we're actually going to stay with you, Rachel, and just go a bit further, and maybe you could share with us a few thoughts on how the evidence generated under A4NH and some of the other programs you supported has informed current and future plans, strategies, and investments.
Yeah, I think sort of thinking forward, what are some of the trajectories for all of us within the community over the next 10 years? I'd probably pick out three. One is sort of the threats that climate change pose to a nutritious food system. And we know that global demand for food is rising, yields may decline or are declining already, certainly productivity growth declining already. Having just come back from the COP, I have many people who've been to many COPs confirm that agriculture and food systems has really been sort of put on the agenda as a major priority for climate change. It was recognized as a key for emissions reduction, for protecting nature, and for strengthening adaptation and resilience. I think that the sort of intersections between climate, health and nutrition, the food system, is going to continue to be a massively high priority, and will need the sorts of evidence and tools that A4NH has been generating to really respond to those challenges. A big part of that is the sort of multiple aspects of nutritious diets, thinking about affordability, safety, seasonality, composition of diets. How do we accelerate innovation in that space? We're particularly interested in the whole area of vegetable R&D. We know that vegetable and fruit consumption is likely to decline further from what is already a very low baseline. And so promoting sustainable, healthy diets across the vegetable value chain is, I think, one key area there. I think the second one is fragility and conflict, and that's possibly an area that has been less well integrated into A4NH in the past, and will need to be a priority going forward. We know that conflicts and protracted crises are undermining livelihoods, damaging agriculture, and exacerbating food insecurity and malnutrition. Climate shocks are increasingly likely to intensify. We already have a very high number of people living in poverty in the most hazard-prone countries, and many of those are fragile and conflict-affected states. So that's a second priority. And I think finally, just picking up another sort of lesson really that I think has come out of A4NH, and I think will be important going forward, is the ability to kind of pivot rapidly towards emerging issues and being able to respond to those as they arise. We've seen that as a big strength in the past of A4NH, with responses around COVID impacts on nutrition, the COVID hub, work on AMR and health more generally. I think, again, that was something that was probably harder to do within the CGIAR before A4NH was in place. And looking to the future, we really need to retain that flexibility and those sources of expertise that have enabled A4NH to pivot quickly and to provide that rapid response on hot issues and hot topics. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, you've highlighted several important points and things that we need to think about going forward in the new CG. Thanks for that. Mutinta, back to you. Looking forward, how do you think the lessons that have been learned from the engagements in the past several years can be taken forward with the evolution of WFP and with the CGIAR? You're muted, Mutinta.
Yeah, I think the first thing for us was the conceptual clarity. Yeah, because when Nutrition Sensitive came about as an organization, it wasn't clear what exactly to detail as we, as we did our programs in order to influence nutrition. And so it allows us to know exactly how to move in terms of the guidance, in terms of how we needed to train, in terms of what the requirements were, and in terms of what the opportunities were. So that was really important for the organization to be clear. And it was through the partnership that we were able to go to any country and almost using a scorecard and say whether that program is nutrition sensitive or not. So conceptual clarity was important for the organization. And also, given that we have been known that we're a food organization, but moving forward, I think we are much more clear on how to be more nutrition sensitive. The second part is for us, I think it brought about an understanding of that the process in nutrition sensitive programming was as important as the end goal. And so through the theories of change and the impact pathways that were developed, we were able to see what partner we would require what time, allowing us to sequence, to layer, and also to bring about the right partners at the right time. So that was, one really way in which we evolved. The third way was the value addition of nutrition in the debates. I think through the partnership, we are now able to break down what does it really mean to achieve nutrition outcomes. Particularly if you use the food systems lens, we can see that throughout the 3 dimensions as an organization, and because we work with different partners, we could actually influence nutrition in the production through our procurement ability, in the transformation, in the agribusiness through fortification or consumption and demand, for example, using the school as a platform. And of course, it brings about quality of programs, because then we are accountable for the different objectives that we're looking forward to. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's what I would say on what some of the lessons have been working with IFPRI.
Thanks, Butinta. Ruel, the last question is to you. Given HKI's long history with implementing integrated agriculture, nutrition, gender-focused programs, and certainly predating even A4NH by many, many years, what do you think is still missing in our understanding of how agriculture, nutrition, and gender can best be leveraged and integrated for improving diet quality and related outcomes? What are some of the key topics that you think should be on the agenda for the next decade?
Thanks, Tiana. I mean, one of the things that we've learned is cost is an enormous barrier for nutritious diets, particularly for the poor. And while we've been proponents of behavior change and nutrition education, and there is evidence to show that that can make a difference, it really cannot successfully lead people to consume diets that are out of their reach on some consistent basis. So one of the things I think we need to learn going forward is how do you make nutritious diets less costly, and at the same time, how do you raise incomes of the poor and influence purchase decisions? And that's a real challenge, both of those. And I think those are things that we need to figure out how to do. And I think how that's influenced work that we're trying to take forward is, rather than have an exclusive focus for a sort of home production and consumption for nutritious foods, we need to look at both nutrition, but the profit and income potential of these agricultural interventions that might be focused on production, processing, and even some off-farm income, so that, again, we address the income component. The other piece that we've realized, and it's been known, is we've in many cases imposed, or at least thought one size fits all, home production, and you've got to have these seeds or raise chickens. And I think we really need to think about a menu of options that are tailored both to the context and to preferences and of both households and their resources. And I think that that's important. The other thing is, we haven't, because these are small producers, we've often given inputs, basic inputs, which has been great. It raises people's interest and so forth. But I think what we need to do is begin to link these groups to middle people, input suppliers that provide, and vendors who provide quality inputs, whether they be of an agriculture, of a veterinary or basis, or agricultural. And from the behavior change perspective, we've often worked with mothers groups, and they exist in many places. I think we have to really shift and learn more about how to use marketing and behavioral economics lenses to nudge purchase behaviors. Because again, poor people have limited income, they have many needs. And nutrition will probably, and nutritious food will probably get short shrift. And the question is, how do you nudge behaviors or some of that income when it does arrive to nutritious foods? And last would be, and I know we've worked with IFPRI a lot on evaluating and monitoring both from the processes and the outcomes. I think we still need to do a better job of figuring out more efficient, more timely, and less costly surveillance and monitoring of these complex interventions so that we can make modifications to the designs when we find certain aspects are not working well in real time. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. And thanks to all the panelists. I think we've heard a lot of good ideas and good feedback on, you know, how the evidence generated has been used, how the partnerships, some of the example partnerships with implementing organizations have worked over the last 10 years, and some ideas for going forward, and what do we need to think about in this space, and how to address remaining questions, and some topics that maybe have been not so well addressed so far. So thanks for all of that. We're actually going to have a few comments from Joost Vinnen, the director of IFPRI, and also the new CGIAR leader for systems transformation. I believe he's going to come on camera and give us a few remarks before we move to the Q&A. So if we can have Jo come on camera, and then we'll bring Marie also on camera and proceed with the Q&A for this panel. So thanks, everybody.
Hi, Diana. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yep, and there you are. Thanks, Jo.
Okay, first, congrats to the tech team for getting me on, from moving me from a visitor to a panelist. So I was worried, but they performed perfect. Yeah, let me start with just repeating what several people have said already. I mean, I just want a big congratulations to A4NH, all the participants, and certainly also the leadership, John McDermott and his team, but also the partners and with whom he worked. And I think that's a point which John has actually made several times to me over the past months and years when we reflected on this, the crucial role of linking up with good partners outside the CGIAR and bring them in, and by doing that, reinforcing the capacity and the quality of the work that we do. I think it was very impressive to hear all the work that's being presented, and of course I've been listening and reading more on it. Marie, I really liked your presentation, your historical review on how thinking has changed and how the research programs have changed over the past couple of decades. I think it really gave a great perspective on where the field comes from, where it has been going. And that, of course, raises the question on the future, right? So what is the next paradigm that we will be using and looking forward? The CGIAR's 2030 research strategy there, I think nutrition and health are quite prominently. It's one of the 5 impact areas, and to make sure that we are putting appropriate attention to it in all the programs throughout what we're going to do. We have designed these, or we are designing, we have designed there in the process of being implemented. The impact area platforms will be recruiting teams for leading these going forward, and so nutrition health is a very important one there. We also have several of our research initiatives which focus explicitly on the things that have been discussed today. There is the shift to sustainable and healthy diets, which Marie is leading, and the fresh initiative focusing more on vegetables and fruits that Diana is co-leading. But at this point, we're also putting together an overview also for outreach and for fora like this, I think, to have a broader perspective on how nutrition is part of a whole series of other initiatives where it is playing, or is supposed to play, or will play an important role or a component. Rachel, and Rolf, I really liked was intrigued by your discussions on what the future areas are, the future areas of specific attention. You mentioned climate change, cost, vegetable fragility and conflict, and I think all of these are quite explicitly part of the portfolio that we have designed. We have, as you know already, the Fresh Initiative specifically on vegetables. I think climate change, I was also at COP briefly, but I also the discussions now were very strong. I think climate change has to be a really strong element in this work. And I think Marie's focus on sustainability of healthy diets really takes that front and center, I would say. And on the fragility and conflict, we are right now putting in place a new initiative that will be part of the portfolio as well. So let me not take up more time. I think the success of A4NH is an opportunity and a challenge for us going forward. The opportunity is we can build on the great insight, the work has been done. It's also a challenge to do as good as A4NH or even better going forward in the future. And so that's up to us to make that work. So congratulations again to everybody, and thanks for giving me a few minutes here. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And thanks everyone for letting Joe join our panel. We will now have a few minutes for questions. The first question comes from Nkita Goyal, and the question, I think maybe, Mutinta, maybe you can take this question. Convergence is highly emphasized, but it's difficult to implement. Do you know of any studies or evidence or experience on how to prioritize certain partnerships or interventions?
I think there have been a number of studies, right, that try to bring about different partners and linkages or synergies. There are quite a number of studies. I did mention previously on the proof of concept that we did as WFP, and you could Google it on prevention of stunting. And what that did really was to try and bring convergence across the different sectors. And so, yeah, there are some studies and there are different results, and also it depends on the context. So you could put certain interventions together and get a different result depending on where you are. So I think there are a few studies, but I could just mention that one which we did as a proof of concept on the prevention of stunting.
Thanks, Mutinta. Maybe Marie, you could maybe take the next question from Amanda Wyatt. With the shift from nutrition-sensitive agriculture to food systems as a concept or approach, what do you see might be the risks or opportunities for nutrition?
Yes, that's a very, very good question. And I had 7 minutes, and I think I probably used 7.5, but I thought that was cutting short on what's next. And so thanks for the question. And I think also Yo did introduce some of our thinking and with the development of the initiatives for the 1CGIAR. We are now indeed moving to a much broader system. We're moving to food systems as a whole, as complex as they are. And we're trying to, our team is trying to come at it from the consumer's perspective. So starting with the consumers and trying to understand what drives their choices and how food systems, and especially food environments and small producers, for example, can do for facilitating their access to nutritious foods by making them more affordable, more appealing, more convenient, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that this is a challenge that I personally find extremely scary, because food systems are just such a big world, and we can come at it naively thinking, oh yeah, we're going to give them all the information about what consumers want and they'll just do it. But we know it's not that simple. So we are bringing also the political economy and the governance issues and the interacting with policymakers very closely to see how much change we can achieve. But we know it's going to be challenging. And the challenge in our previous life of developing randomized controlled trials for complex programs was nothing compared to what we have to deal with now. But I am confident that we are bringing to a big system that's actually important in the world of agriculture and nutrition. We're bringing in a strong consumer demand set of research programs and work packages that will at least try to bring nutrition and diets, especially to the forefront. And there's a lot of support from UN institutions and from the UNFSS to do so. So I think we have, and that's the momentum we have now, and we'll try to deliver on that, but it will be challenging.
Certainly, yeah, thanks, Marie. So for the next question from Romain Clark-Roque, maybe I'll turn to Rachel. He says, or she's, sorry, I don't know, but I understand that climate change is now an important focus. Are other environmental changes considered important for the future of agriculture and nutrition, especially as biodiversity loss identified as important?
Yeah, yes, absolutely, and thanks for flagging that. I think it's this sort of nexus of climate change and nature issues and biodiversity is a really big part of that. As part of the COP campaign that we've been working on the global action agenda for innovation in agriculture, we undertook a number of evidence reviews, including one on biodiversity and climate change. And I'll post that in the chat here, because that I think the diet dimension of that is very important. So when we're talking about sustainable agriculture, there are multiple dimensions to this. I think it's about climate resilience. It's about how do you get productivity growth and food value chains that contribute to nutrition outcomes, but also contribute to sustainability, climate resilience, and so on. So I think it's a key linkage, and it's one that we're perhaps only just beginning to unpack and explore. But I'll post the link in the chat.
Great, thank you. Maybe now a question for Rolf from Gopinath Radhakrishnan. Can we account for opportunity costs of promoting nutrition-sensitive agriculture, possibly in areas where employment is predominantly from non-agricultural sectors or where crops are grown primarily for commercial reasons?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I think opportunity costs in any context and for any intervention is really important and something we often don't take into account. And I think maybe I'll indirectly answer that. Marie was mentioning how IFPRI is thinking about the consumer from the convenience side, from the appeal side. Those are opportunity costs. Where you access food, how you purchase it, how stable it is, how convenient it is. So I think opportunity cost in all interventions is absolutely critical. I think also we're referring to sort of commercial agriculture or something in between. And I still think there's a space in between large-scale commercial agriculture and a space between that and the very small scale, and something in between that allows some aggregation to take place to make, again, the opportunity costs and the barriers to access markets and so forth less costly, or inputs less costly to the small producer. I think that's an area that requires a lot more exploration and innovation, because I don't think, when you deal with somebody who has a hectare or two, and then commercial scale, there's a huge gap in between. And I think there's an important role in terms of how do you look at those aggregation methods, and aggregation in terms of leveraging for better quality inputs, but also for market access, transportation, possibly small technologies that make either production, processing easier and more profitable.
Great, thanks. And so we have one last question from Sangeeta Rajesh, which is a two-part question, which maybe I'll ask Marie to take 1 minute to talk about the first part, and then either Rolf or Mutinta, one of you can maybe take the second part. The first part is, are there success stories of nutrition-sensitive agriculture policy and practice, which I think you've addressed some, but maybe you could make a few comments. And then the second part is, what do you think are the reasons for differing uptake of nutrition sensitive strategies across the Global South? So Marie, maybe just 1 minute on the first part.
Yes, on the first part, yes, there have been examples of success, but they were, and actually there were examples of success with Helen Keller, where their program in West Africa was highly successful in improving, in reducing anemia among children, and that was very high, and mothers, if I remember well. And also reducing stunting, but those programs were very complex. That's the example I was giving. It had all of the components you wanted, you could imagine would help, and it did help. And the more components you have, the more likely you were to have an impact on the outcomes. But it's not necessarily replicable and probably not scalable.
Great, thanks. And maybe I'll let Mutinta have 1 minute and Ralph have 1 minute for the second part, if you can, and then we'll be closing this session. So Mutinta?
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, having done nutrition sensitive guidance at headquarters and coming to the field, one of the ways one of the barriers to uptake has been the way we assess the problem and the way we design and implement. So often it's really not clear what are the multidimensional factors that would influence an outcome. So clearly it's really just how do we make sure that we measure the right thing, and we're trying to address, using the right objective across the different programs.
Great, thanks. And Ralph?
Yeah, I think the differential uptake is related to an incomplete understanding of the context and opportunities. Case in point, in Senegal, we promoted poultry production for egg production in a peri-urban area. We went back a year after the completion of the intervention, only to find that people were then growing or raising broilers because it made more sense to them. And I think we need to go back to the intervention areas that we've completed interventions in and look what, if anything, remains, and how things have been transformed. I think that's where we'll find the real keys to what can potentially work in those contexts.
Great, thank you. Thanks to all of our panelists and to Marie for her opening presentation. I think you guys have provided a lot of insights and a lot of food for thought, both from what we've learned and also for the future. So thanks a lot. And I will turn it back over to Janet for the next session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Deanna, and I echo your thanks to Marie and to Rachel and Ralph and Mutinta. That was a really rich discussion, and we're really grateful to you for bringing that forward. We're going to change up the pace now as we invite researchers who have been an integral part of the A4NH program to give rapid fire presentations on their work. Inspired by the popular "How It Started, How It's Going" meme, these researchers will, in just 2 minutes, give us a snapshot of how far their work has come over the last 10 years. This was quite a challenge to take on, and we cannot wait to hear what they have to say. To get us started, we welcome Hazel Malapit, Senior Research Coordinator from IFPRI. Hazel?
Thanks, Janet. The Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, or WEA, started out with 3 pilots in Bangladesh, Guatemala, and Uganda. The original WEA is a population-based tool for measuring women's empowerment in the agricultural sector and can help identify ways to overcome the obstacles and constraints that they face. Today, the WEA is being used globally by 134 organizations and individuals collecting data in 56 countries. The WEA has also grown into a broader suite of quantitative and qualitative methods and tools for measuring empowerment and gender equality across different user needs. So that journey took us from the original WEA to the shorter abbreviated WEA, both of which are population-based monitoring tools covering 5 domains of empowerment, to the project level WEA, which has 3 domains and now 10 indicators. So unlike the original WEA that was designed for a specific program, which was the Feed the Future initiative, the Pro WEA is co-developed with 13 agricultural development projects in 9 countries in Africa and South Asia, and included adaptations for health and nutrition, livestock, and market inclusion projects. Now, while the WEA tools are still anchored in the agriculture sector, we are expanding our tool development to capture empowerment beyond production to include other nodes of the value chain in the Pro WEA for market inclusion module. We are also working with the World Bank Living Standards Measurement Study Team and the 50 by 2030 initiative to develop and scale up a new women's empowerment metric for national statistical systems. So to learn more, visit our online resource center at wea.ifpri.info and take our free Foundations distance learning course. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Next, we'll hear from Joe Gates, Research Fellow at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and co-director of ANH Academy. Joe?
Thanks, Janet. Hi, everyone. The ANH Academy was founded in response to the need for joined-up approaches to nutrition and health problems, as identified through a lot of the early work on agri-nutrition pathways. As a network and a platform, the idea was to nurture the growth of a global community, to foster collaboration, to stimulate new and innovative research, and to support learning, sharing, and the uptake of evidence. We want your crazy ideas, proclaimed one John McDermott back in 2015. From the Academy Weeks that rotated between Africa and Asia to the overwhelmingly popular online events during this COVID era, this global network has flourished into almost 6,000 researchers, practitioners, and policymakers in over 130 countries, most of whom are in Africa or Asia. This reflects remarkable progress in linking up diverse fields of inquiry, whereby a whole new generation now identified as food systems experts. This journey is the sum of so many parts propelled by the goodwill and the energy of stakeholders in every region of the world. And it includes hundreds of experts who have crafted learning labs for thousands of participants, scientific committee members who have co-shaped conferences, Academy Weeks that have broken down all manner of barriers. Includes those who choose this community as a sounding board for their ideas and their methods and their evidence, not to mention the technical group working groups which have reached across disciplines to evolve our collective understanding on so many important topics, including food environments, economic evaluations, women's empowerment, and time use. The impacts of these activities have led directly to new collaborations, research agendas, and donor priorities and policy changes. And every single one of these activities would not have been possible without the incredible contribution of A4&H and the CGIAR family in general, as individuals and institutions who have added so much value to this enterprise. Today, we celebrate this partnership and we give thanks for the role that it has played in this shaping this vibrant global community. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we'll hear from Aiken Birol, Director of Impact and Strategy at Harvest Plus. Aiken?
Thanks, Janet. So by 2012, we already knew that it was possible to breed micronutrient-dense staples without compromising yield. The evidence on the efficacy of biofortified crops in improving micronutrient deficiency status was growing. So we started asking ourselves, well, farmers and consumers are going to grow biofortified crops and foods. What kind of products, messaging, incentives, complementary inputs, or encouragement nudges, what would they need to substitute non-biofortified staples with biofortified to improve their diet quality cost effectively? So we implemented a series of studies with consumers to assess their acceptance of biofortified foods, paying special attention to the role of behavior change communication for vitamin A crops that change color, and to identification mechanisms for mineral biofortified crops with invisible nutrient traits. As delivery programs were starting around 2012, we also had the opportunity to implement studies with farmers to understand if and which biofortified varieties farmers liked, what performed well on their fields under their current management practices, input availability, what were the adoption, diffusion, disadoption rates and why, and what kind of delivery models were cost-effective, cost-efficient, sustainable, inclusive, and scalable. So our current strategy for catalyzing biofortification scale-up is based on sharing all of this evidence and the learnings with agents and agencies of scale. These are national systems, international financial institutions, the private sector of all sizes, UN agencies, humanitarian organizations. Harvest Plus can assist the journey to scale by facilitating the development of quality standards, providing expertise in product development, technical assistance when and if needed. So overall, thanks to A4NH and other key donors, FCDO, BMGF, in the past 10 years, we proved the concept of biofortification and codified learnings on scalable delivery models. And now biofortification is at a tipping point for being taken to scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Aiken. Now we welcome Alejandro Ortega Beltran, plant pathologist from the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture. Alejandro?
Yes, thank you, Janet. I don't see a part of my slide over there. Okay, it's over there. So aflatoxin contamination is very common in tropical and subtropical environments, and basically in a lot of African environments. So IITA and partners have developed several aflatoxin biocontrol products, and this is a technology initially developed in the US, where it's highly effective in maize, pistachio, and almond. But in Nigeria, everything started for the African continent. And initially, biocontrol products were manufactured in a laboratory scale, and only a small quantity of AflaSafe products were able to be produced, about 300 kilos per week, which is just enough to do a few experimental trials. So it was necessary to scale up the production of these products. So right now, after demand and awareness of the product increase, 4 private sector companies manufacture AflaSafe for 10 countries with a capacity of 5 tons per hour. Just one of these companies in Nigeria has invested already over $5 million to make these products accessible to farmers. And overall, all of these companies have produced over 4,000 tons of AflaSafe, which is enough to treat 400,000 hectares. And as a result of this, about 800,000 tons of aflatoxin safe crops have been produced. So some of the aspects of the technology developed here in African nations are now being explored for implementation in the US and in other countries. So this is just the beginning, and it's going to increase in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandro. I'm seeing some great chat, some great movement in the chat. I'm congratulating everybody for these presentations. And so just before we go to our next speaker, I want to ask all of our rapid fire presenters to stay close, because at the end, we're going to ask you all to go on camera briefly so that we can thank you and appreciate this incredible presentation you're doing. Next up, we'll hear from Jeff Vage, who is chair of the ANH Academy Scientific Committee for 2021. Jeff?
Thank you, Janet. The A4NH program identified antimicrobial resistance as a challenge faced by both agriculture and public health, and deserving a more integrated One Health approach, particularly in low and middle income countries. We brought together CGIAR centers, external public health institutions, and have produced over 50 research outputs, a few of which I'll highlight in a moment. But importantly, the program also fostered a new CGIAR AMR hub with a 5-point agenda that you can see here. Now, our research on antimicrobial use so far has shown how weaknesses in health systems for both humans and livestock in farming communities has generated a highly informal system of quite similar practices across study sites in Africa and Asia, one feature of which is the widespread sale and use of human antibiotics on livestock. Our studies in the presence and transmission of AMR in food systems have focused largely in livestock value chains. In Kenya, for instance, we've shown that humans and their livestock share AMR gene complexes, but also that having livestock is not associated with increased human AMR in households. And we've taken our studies beyond livestock to aquaculture and food crop sectors. In food crops, we've analyzed the global literature that reveals widespread AMR of critical human importance in bacteria on salad vegetables in informal markets. Studies on trial interventions and their impact reveal a particular opportunity in low-income settings for AMR-sensitive interventions aimed at more general protection of human and animal health, but with good potential to reduce AMR risks through better hygiene and biosecurity. And in Vietnam, experiments have shown the potential to remove the excessive use of antibiotics as livestock feed additives for growth promotion. And finally, as the AMR Hub develops, it is engaging national policymaking and supporting capacity building initiatives that, along with research such as this, should continue as a legacy of the A4NH program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And now we come to our last of the rapid fire presentations. We welcome Sylvia Alonso, Senior Scientist at the International Livestock Research Institute. Sylvia, over to you.
Thank you. So A4NH research on food safety over the past decade can be described in one word, like game-changing. And there is one main element of change, and it's been mostly a shift from research that is focused on finding problems and very risk assessment focused to research that moves into finding solutions, developing solutions, working with the markets and working with the actors that we want to have a positive impact on. So this has been what our food safety research has been focusing on. So the evidence that this research has generated helps legitimize informal markets. There is a focus on working on food safety in informal markets and to bring out the role, an important role, as sources of nutrition and livelihoods and health. One key example of this kind of work has been our work on the informal dairy sector in countries like Kenya and India. So in those countries, we've developed, tested, and even scaled out schemes that focus on training, providing certification and incentives to sellers of milk in informal markets in these countries. So these schemes help the actors, the people selling milk, feel empowered, feel supported by their governments, and to be more able to contribute to the food systems. And similar approaches of this kind to food safety has been tested in many of the countries, like Vietnam and Cambodia. So these decade-long learnings have ultimately consolidated into something that wasn't there before, and it's a sort of recipe for fighting food safety challenges in informal markets, which is still a big question. This novel approach to food safety management involves three elements: providing capacity building, providing incentives for change, and creating an enabling policy and market environment. So this is the legacy now that A4NH research lives, and on which researchers, development partners in countries worldwide hopefully will continue to build. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. And we're going to take just a moment here and pull up the video of all of our rapid fire speakers, because with their slides, we didn't have an opportunity to let you see their faces. I know that our technical team behind the scenes is working on that, but I just wanted to take a moment and thank them for, really packing so much information into those brief 2 minutes. We know that that was not an easy task, but I think everyone can agree that this was really, an incredible sharing of information. And we're really grateful to you all for taking on that challenge. I don't know if we're going to be able to get everybody's video up, but if not, we will move on to the next panel. Turning our attention now to, gathering my thoughts here. Turning our attention now to our second panel to explore what has been learned about national food system transformation in A4NH's 4 focus countries: Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Vietnam, including how COVID-19 has raised One Health considerations in food system transformation and resilience. Our moderator for this session is Namakolo Kovic, Senior Research Coordinator with IFPRI, who also coordinates A4NH country engagement work. Namakolo, thanks so much for being here today, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Janet. I think for this session, we are really going to be looking at the need for food systems transformation that has gained much attention, particularly in the last 2 years, propelled by the interests raised by the UN Food Systems Summit process. When A4NH started its second phase in 2017, there was an intentional shift from looking at how to make diets healthier through value chain lens to a more food systems lens. A diet-centered approach was taken to the research to inform meaningful food systems transformation focusing on 4 countries: Ethiopia, Vietnam, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. You have already heard about diverse research perspectives that A4NH has been engaged in. In this session, we will provide an overview of the lessons that have been learned from our efforts to inform national food systems transformation in these focus countries. And we will start with a framing presentation from Professor Inge Brouwer of Wageningen University and Research, who has led the Food Systems for Healthier Diets research flagships of A4NH. Over to you, Inge, for the framing presentation.
Thank you, Namakulo, and let me share my screen with you. I hope you can see the screen. So I'm really feeling very privileged to be able to present our learning journey on focusing on national food system transformations for healthier diets. If I may refer to what Jade said, maybe this was another crazy idea of John to ask Wageningen University to lead this flagship and to work with the excellent researchers of the CG. And I think it has been quite successful. So to go a little bit to the history why A4NH started is that the A4NH and the food system flagship responds to the concerns of that there are many people eating too little, too much, or just the wrong types of foods. And that this problem is context specific and is depending on who you are and where you live and what you do and why you do what you do. So poor diets are actually the driver of all forms of malnutrition, and they have devastating consequences, not only for health, but also for people's cognitive development, for jobs and employment later on in life and related economic development. And we also realized that these consequences come with a high cost or unsustainable cost for the environment. So 5 years ago, A4NH took the intentional shift to address healthy diets through the lens of value change, and we shifted to the lens of food systems, and that was the moment that Wageningen University also came in. So a next important decision that was taken is to have country-specific approaches, as Namakulo said already. And food systems are central in many low and middle income countries to provide sufficient food and jobs and employment for their populations, but they're changing very rapidly also in rural areas. And to address these challenges, specific approaches or context-specific approaches are needed. And it seems to be most sensible to start at the national level to use the national food perspective. And they have to link all the things that happen at global level, to link and coordinate and manage them to the situations that happen subnationally, like the urban food systems. So we focused our work on 4 countries, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. And when we started our flagship, a few people were actually talking about food system, but that changed rapidly, and many reports came on, and we did see specific issues that needed action. And many of the reports that came out used the food system as a political discourse and asked for radical reforms in terms of food systems are broken, as if we can fix it, which was of course not the issue. And there were also very different understandings and views of food system depending on the discipline you're coming from, which also influenced the solutions that were proposed. And looking at all these reports, we saw a high focus on improving production or production efficiency and focusing on midstream to improve income from food system. But there was very little attention given to drivers, to food choices of consumers, to the food environment, the places where consumers are getting their food, but also on political economy and power relations and on navigating trade-offs. So many different frameworks have been introduced, and we took the deliberate choice to use the high-level panel of experts framework, which is in a simple way showing the different components of the food system, drivers and its multiple outcomes, of which diets is one. And we did efforts to introduce the reverse thinking. So starting from diets and from dietary gaps, and then thinking about what is needed from each component of the food system to enable consumers to make the healthiest choice. So in our 4 countries, if you go to the left side of this slide, we started with a food system analysis and developed a common research agenda with a large group of stakeholders and experts from the countries we are working in. And we actually also did realize that doing these analysis and providing evidence was not sufficient enough to change or transform the food system, what we were looking for. And we did realize that we also have to look at different approaches on, or find an answer on how to change with the information and evidence we have, how to transform these food systems. And as I said, they are changing. It's a dynamic, a complete, holistic situation of food system. But we have also seen that it can be stubbornly stable, and that it's difficult to change food systems. So the approaches we took can be summarized into these 3, well, let's call them pathways that we use to influence the existing food systems. And the first pathway is related to political pressure or policy pressure. And let's call it the push. So have we looked at how could we at national level influence political debates to give a pressure, or to give a pressure to food systems to change towards healthier diets. Some examples of what we did is support to the Ethiopian government to develop food-based dietary guidelines that indeed were adopted as a flagship program for the government. And not only to inform consumers on what they should eat, but also to set standards and targets for public and private investments. Another example, what we did is the support given to the Vietnam government for the National Action Plan to Zero Hunger. And what was important there as well is that we established benchmark sites in rural, peri-urban and urban regions in the country, and collected information and incorporated that in discussions with policymakers. And we also did foresight analysis, for example, in Nigeria, where we worked with state governments to discuss ways of improving food availability, either through intensification or to extending area to crop, but also to look at possibilities of how to make foods or healthy foods more affordable. And we will have in a few weeks' time a last webinar on that. So that's the first approach. And I have to say that which approach had it differed per country, where the emphasis of the approach was. But it was important also that all the 3 approaches should actually be interlinked to accelerate each other. So a second pathway that we used was coalition building. And coalition building meant bringing together a wide variety of partners and stakeholders that have not collaborated before, and having diverging interests and worldviews, where this on healthy diets and food system transformations were discussed, where negotiations started, where we had co-creation of knowledge. So we identified multiple stakeholder platforms and networks in the 4 countries, but we also realized that the existing MSPs were very important in exchange of ideas, but they were not yet the forerunners on introducing narratives of food systems or to have a foresight vision for which they need much more support. And we also realized that still the consumers or representatives of the consumers were underrepresented. And although we made efforts to integrate private sector in the discussions, the role of private sector in the transformations, and especially focused on the informal markets, who are the main providers of food to a poor resource population, still need to be strengthened. A fourth pathway that we used was creating and supporting variation of solutions. So we tried out a lot of different food systems innovations that were either focused on dynamics and motives of consumers, on reform of food environments, to line up informal markets, to introduce nutrient-dense food production. And also here, we always tried to have a combination of a technology introduction coupled with a behavior change. And then I'm not only talking about behavior change of consumers, but also behavior change of the food system actors that we were addressing. So underlying this, there were two important issues that we tried to support. One was capacity building, and then mainly building up this pyramid of capacity. So of beneficiaries, which was more by learning and doing through our programs, but also higher up in academics. And I would like to highlight the importance of involving young scientists in our food system program. For example, also the MSc program or grants we had in 3 of our 4 countries, where we involved MSc students and their supervisors in the program, also linking them to our coalition efforts. And globally, if you would like to see more of our evidence, please go to the Food System Resource Center. Or if you would like to know more on food environments, please follow our mini MOOC on food environments that were developed as part of the program. So the last point I would like to raise is the importance of rigorous monitoring on the food system transformation. Yes, we did a lot of efforts in developing indicators, in compiling indicators across all the food system using the HLPE. But we also have to realize that we have to use this monitoring and also follow on how are difference resolved, how are relationships or conducive relationships built, and how are efforts made to create overlapping visions for the future. A last comment is on the UN Food System Summit, and of course beyond. I think this was an excellent opportunity for our flagship to leverage the evidence. And we supported the food system dialogues, both member state dialogues as independent dialogues in the 4 countries. And we could also clearly see that our evidence was used to develop the pathways. And our next challenge is to integrate the next steps in food systems for healthier diets in the context-specific pathways that have been formulated in the 4 countries. So with this, thank you, and I would like to give the word back to Namkulo.
Thank you very much, Inge. I just wanted to remind our audience that we will be taking questions for Q&A. So if you can put your questions in the chat box, these are being monitored and we'll field as many of them as possible afterwards. We now move on to our panel discussion, and we have 4 distinguished panelists from 4 countries. Dr. Cisse Boltema, who is Senior Program Manager for the Sakota Declaration Federal Program Delivery Unit at the Ministry of Health in Ethiopia. Dr. Truong Tuyemai, who is Deputy Director of the National Institute of Nutrition in Vietnam. Dr. Fulake Samuel, a Senior Lecturer at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, and Dr. Rudaba Kondka, Country Director for Bangladesh Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. I welcome you all today to this conversation, really. IT, could you help me getting the spotlight on our panelists. I know that Dr. Sise might not be able to be on video because of poor bandwidth. To look at first, I want to start with Dr. Sise. Dr. Sise, to build momentum for food systems transformation requires scalable actions that promote impact at scale. And Ethiopia has taken the unique approach of including a government declaration as a game-changing solution in the national food systems transformation pathway. Can you briefly enlighten us on what the Sekota Declaration is about and why it is being considered as a game-changing solution? Over to you, Dr. Sise.
Thank you so much, Dr. Namukolo. The Sekota Declaration is an innovative government of Ethiopian commitment to end stunting by the year 2030. This declaration was launched in 2015 and it has 3 phases. We call it the innovation phase, which extends from 2015 to 2020. And currently we are on the expansion phase, which started as of July 2021 and extends up to 2025. And the last is the scale-up phase, which will start from 2026. During the past 5 years of the innovation phase period, the government coordinated 9 sector ministries, including health, agriculture, water, education, social protection, gender, and other 3 more sectors, including finance, to implement multi-sectoral, nutrition-sensitive, nutrition-specific, and nutrition-smart infrastructure interventions in 40 innovation phase waradas in Tigray and Amhara regions. The government of Ethiopia has considered Sekota Declaration as one of the game-changing solutions in the Ethiopian food system transformation pathway is because, number one, we did the innovation phase impact study jointly with Johns Hopkins University, and which has showed us the multi-sectoral efforts and interventions has reduced the stunting prevalence of 6.7% to 7.9% reduction, and also over 109,000 children were averted from stunting. So this was the impact study that was generated in June 2021. And also the second reason that we also identified the Sekota Declaration as one of the game-changing solutions in the food system transformation pathway is that agriculture interventions had been the greatest impact on stunting. Based on the program performance records, over 70% of the households in the target population were reached with at least one form of agricultural interventions, either through poultry production, goat milk production, or nutrient-dense crops or fruits and vegetables. And improved agriculture has translated, based on the study, to reduced household food insecurity and better nutrition for pregnant women and also young children. Therefore, improvement in the infant and young child nutrition achieved through complementary feeding and reduced household food insecurity was the primary driver for stunting reduction, which accounted for 90% of the stunted cases averted in the Sekota Declaration innovation phase waradas. And also finally, the Sekota Declaration was selected as one of the game-changing solutions because the Sekota Declaration brought 6 innovations that address the challenges of multi-sectoral coordination, as well as some of the complexities in the program management for both governance, accountability, performance management, as well as women empowerment and also community engagement. So this is why the Sekota Declaration is being considered as a game-changing solution in the Ethiopian food system transformation pathway. Currently, based on the learning from the innovation phase, we have now started the expansion phase from 40 waradas to 240 waradas. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Namukon.
Thank you very much. Just for context, the waradas are districts, so from 40 waradas to 200 and something waradas, that's quite an expansion. Dr. Truong, We've heard about programs and trying to bring this complexity to work that we were warned about earlier. But in your case, considering consumer perspective is also important. Consumers are, after all, the ones who make the choices that can either make or break the transformative processes that we are thinking of. What role have consumer perspectives played in informing the food systems transformation pathway that Vietnam is embarking on? Over to you, Dr. Truong.
Oh, thank you, Namukono. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, thank you. Organization invited me on behalf of the Vietnam team. I would like to share some information from the question from the Mr. Namukolo. Yeah, for the regarding food system transformation, the Vietnamese government has been building the sustainable, transparency, and the accountable food system in the Vietnam now. Currently, we are developing an action plan on the sustainable food system 2021-2030. We focus in the 5 pillars and 6 the priority area important solution, including strengthening multi-stakeholder and the mobilization resort of the party to implementation the food system in the Vietnam. So I agree in the for this section meeting today. We talk about the, I think is a very important the project A4NH. So the doing in the Vietnam now. So A4NH is one of the project implemented in the Vietnam, and has make great the contribution and the support things the policy development, providing a model and the scientific evidence, and the collecting the agriculture for the nutrition and health. So the Vietnam has done guideline for the nutrition sensitive agriculture under the Zero Hunger National Action Plan, and another strategy for the rural development, and the strategy national nutrition. So I think there's a many the policy development from the to contribute A4NH the evidence and the A4NH for the guideline. So I would like to back the main thing for the question. So and the important point emphasize for the transformation of the sustainable food system in the Vietnam, which is to put the consumer at the center point for the own action in the Vietnam. So therefore, we are focusing on the education, communication, and the counseling for the population in the Vietnam on the proper nutrition practice and the balanced diets, healthy foods using, and the consumption and the production safe food, and the avoiding food loss. Also, we have developed in the dietary guideline and the label food pyramid nutrition recommendation as a public popular in the Vietnam. So also we educate the consumer people how to preventing malnutrition and micronutrient deficiency in the poor and the mountainous area. Also, we focus in the control overweight and obesity and the chronic non-communicable disease. So now we this problem is increasing by year in the Vietnam. So I think in the Vietnam upholds the role of the consumer. So as you know, the demand when the determines the supply. So the consumer change their perception and the overlead and the practice about the sustainable consumption, healthy consumption, and the wise consumption. can help the Vietnam people can get the sustainable food system and the achieve the goal reducing the malnutrition and preventing overweight and obesity. So also we improving the health and protecting the environment and the sustaining the economic growth and to help Vietnam to achieve the SDG. So I think I would like to say something new. Thank you. In back the Nakumunu. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It sounds like nutrition education is at the center of how you are going to be using the food-based dietary guidelines in Vietnam, which is great. And moving on to Dr. Fulake. Fulake, for years, WHO has given guidelines that we should eat 300 to 400 grams of fruits and vegetables per day. And yet this has been very tough to implement, even in rich countries for that matter. But I hear you've decided to do something about it in Nigeria. So what are you doing to address the barriers that may be a challenge in terms of attaining higher consumption levels of fruits and vegetables? Fulake, your ideas.
Thank you, Namukolo, and thank you for inviting me to join this panel. It's great to be here. In collaboration with Badminton University and several other partners, we are currently undertaking a study among low-income households in some communities in Ibadan, Nigeria, urban households. And we are aiming to improve fruit and vegetable intake in line with the WHO guidelines that you've just mentioned. The initial baseline assessments looked at the barriers and revealed that the major barrier was affordability, although there were some other barriers that were also revealed. So what is happening in this study is that we designed interventions around food systems innovations, which were co-created with the communities. And I think that is one of the highlights of the work, the co-creation aspect with these low-income households to actually contextualize the interventions that will help them to improve their intake of fruits and vegetables. So we carried out 3 complementary interventions that were related to accessibility, affordability, and acceptability of fruits and vegetables among these low-income urban households. And these interventions included the first one, the consumer-responsive retail innovations that was done among fruits and vegetable vendors to enhance the accessibility of consumers. So this involved time-space interventions, assortment interventions, improving display of fruits and vegetables by these vendors. And there were also some other aspects that had to do with hygiene and customer service. Like I said before, these were co-created by the vendors in the neighborhood and in the wet markets where fruits and vegetables are mainly sold. The second complementary intervention had to do with the use of coupons as a price incentive to improve affordability. And this kind of nutrition-sensitive social protection program was implemented in collaboration with the first aspect of the consumer retail innovations that I mentioned. A third complementary intervention that is ongoing with it is the promotional events, the aspect of trying to change behavior through campaigns and messaging on fruits and vegetables, especially around the 5-a-day concept, which we found was a really difficult concept to break down in the local language and in the local context. But yes, these 3 innovations, food system innovations, tailored around improving affordability, accessibility, and acceptability have been found to be very useful. And we have learned a lot of lessons. We have learned, we've come to understand some wider social dynamics and lived experiences of vendors and of consumers in our food environments with respect to fruits and vegetables. And we have been able to actually contextualize interventions in this area to improve fruit and vegetable
consumption.
So before I let you go, Fulake, very quickly, you started off by saying this work was being done to try and address one of the big barriers, which is affordability. I know the work is not yet done. Are you seeing any glimpses of hope that this might actually happen? And if so, what might that be?
Yes, there are glimpses of hope. From the feedback from the communities, we see that it is actually becoming a habit to start consuming fruits and vegetables in the quantities recommended, and not just that, in assortment, which, you know, preaches the 5 a day, the different types of fruits and vegetables in the required quantity. So we are seeing some glimpse, and we also see a very good handshake between the innovations of the vendors, those who sell and those who buy. So it's closer, there's a better physical access, there's better economic access, and there's also better understanding of the importance of fruits and vegetables consumption among this low income and generally not very well educated population. So the hope there is, if that can happen among low income communities, then something better can even happen among those that can afford it and those who have higher educational levels to even understand the message.
So thank you. So then hope, and more hope. So I want to pass on now to Dr. Rudava. I mean, the work that you are doing with GAIN, with private sector, often the private sector is looked at as the elephant in the room because we obtain so much of our food from them. And yet they seem to be the ones that perhaps may be doing the least to help us make better choices. So as GAIN, you have actually embarked on not ignoring this elephant in the room. So based on your experiences and dealing with the private sector, what in your view can they, one, continue doing because it will actually help us? What must they stop doing because it certainly is not helpful, and what should they start doing? So essentially, what can they continue doing? What must they stop doing? What can they start doing? Over to you for the challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Namakolo, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. So I think when we're talking about the food system, as Dr. Inge has highlighted, we are talking about a transformation of equitable, sustainable, resilient food system. We are talking, and Dr. May and then Falaki also highlighted the consumer facing everything. So when you think from the seed to stomach, is private sector, private sector, private sector at every age and every type. We're talking about SMEs at the bottom. We are talking about the big private sector, and we're talking about the multinationals. So when you talk about private sector, there is dynamism among the private sector, and you are right. We have not ignored them, because without them, we have to work with them for the consumers and for our better, healthier diet. So I think what they should do, they should keep doing, is making sure that they understand, and we together help and work with the multi-stakeholder, multi-level and multi-sectoral way, that the return on investment for nutrition of food, as we've seen in GNR, that $1 if you invest, return is $16. This is very important, because for the private sector is very important. What is in it for us? What is the profit? But we need to also translate. So we have seen, like example, in the RMG, garments industry, we have worked with them, and we have seen that a lot of them are actually investing in the safe and nutritious healthy diet, midday meal for the workers, for their productivity. This is, they're showing, so they should keep doing those work they are doing, producing from the safe and nutritious food, making sure the market are actually human-centric design and more consumer-centric, and also input in the affordability, which has been highlighted by Dr. Falake very well, that if it's not affordable, we cannot go to the bottom of the pyramid, number one. Number two is that we are also seeing that youth entrepreneurs are coming with SMEs. So we need to invest. So the big companies and big private sectors and the investors are start investing in them. And one example during COVID, that the government has given stimuli to make sure the private sector do not fall back, because the food system, as Dr. Inge has highlighted, was broken. So how from the seed to stomach, we keep making sure the private sector are activated, and they themselves collectively with the public sector, civil society, academia work together, which they have started. They used to work in silos. I think they should continue doing that, being at the center and work with the women and youth, and being excited about that. They are contributing to the nutrition outcome, to the healthy diet, and also the planet, people, and prosperity, not only human health, animal health, as well as the planet. The third thing we feel that they need to continue doing, and you have seen it, Dr. Namakulo, in your country as well, that they, once they see women entrepreneurs coming, collecting them, collective empowerment of women together with the youth is a voice they can raise, and they have started raising from the very bottom of the pyramid when the production starts. So I think these are something they can. Now, question is what they can stop. We see high sugar, high salt. We have also heard from our Vietnam friend that, obesity, overweight increasing. So how can they also bring those changes with the WHO and have the same speaking that, yes, we will reduce ultra processed food, we will reduce the sugar, we'll reduce the salt. We want the planet to be healthy, we want human to be healthy, and we want to work in an equitable way. So we will not violate BMS code, we will not impact negatively on the environment, and we'll also make sure that the community interactive and SMEs are supported. They are not basically exploited. So this is what they should stop doing, which some of them, I will not say, but there are some of them doing, and this is responsibility. So what we can start? This is a very interesting question. So I think it is important that if we see in Bangladesh as an example, 72% people purchase food from the rural area from market, 96 from the market. So all private sector. So they should look at the human-centric markets, human-centric market design. They should look at how affordability and the consumption are linked, because in the Lancet 2016, we have seen that though we are talking about 5-6 vegetables and fruits, as Dr. Falaka said, the affordability is not there. So how can we make sure they start doing that, working with the civil society and evidence, build on evidence, they build new products for different categories, including the bottom of the pyramid. The second one is that promote an SMEs and do a revolution of commodity exchange. So when Netherlands, Inge, where Dr. Inge is there, we have a lot of vegetables we are getting support, have new technology and innovation, start that, bring that, export market, do commodity exchange, so that we have enough for everybody and no one is left behind. So I think with this, I will just end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Inge, you have kind of really painted a nice picture for us on how A4NH started working in the countries. And I like the fact that when the UN Food Systems Summit came on board, A4NH actually took that as an opportunity to say, what more can we do? So we have challenges here for our food systems. We've got the dietary guidelines, as Dr. Truong has described in Vietnam, hopefully educate the public to do better in terms of their choices. We have affordability, which is a challenge, as we've heard from Fulakia, so we need to do something about that. We have government programs and policies, as Dr. Sise has described, that can help us in terms of perhaps bringing interventions together at localities, as they've done in the Scotta Declaration. So going forward, we now have this grand opportunity where you've started work in countries. The countries have produced food systems transformation pathways, and you have actually helped to actually put those pieces together. So question is, what do you see as how you can actually work with that or adapt in these plans that you are bringing on board that Yo Swinen talked about earlier? What do you see yourselves doing to build on the momentum that has now been developed building on the good work that has already been done in these countries, and then perhaps lessons for other countries as well. Over to you.
Thank you, Namakulo. That's really a big question that you're asking, and also not easy to answer. And I think that was highlighted also by Marie Ruel at the end of the previous session. So as I said, the food system and the pathways that have been developed are offering a unique opportunity actually to focus more on national food systems. And reading the different pathways, at least of the 4 countries we are working in, I think they also give very good entry points to commit to, I would say, to support the implementation of the pathway, because that's actually the next step, that we have to support the countries to do so. And still, if I read the different pathways and the consumer choices and the food environment still needs quite some support to get integrated. And I think that's also one of our tasks, to continue to do that, to deliver evidence of the importance of a diet-centered approach, using food-based dietary guidelines. But as I said, not only to inform the consumers, that's an important role of the guidelines, but also to use it to set directions for policy discussions, for example. So next, as I indicated in the processes, we also have to support to the different processes, have to look at the power imbalances, to draw in private sector, to support these discussions where negotiations take place. Not only highlighting that there are trade-offs, that's what we know already, but especially supporting ways to navigate. I mean, how do you decide whose interest should go first, and which group should wait a while before their interest will be addressed? And I think these processes are very important. What Folake mentioned is the nature of co-creation is important, I think, and that will also change probably our role as scientists a bit, that we have to co-create, to adapt certain ideas of solutions to the local context. And as Rodaba also identified, we really have to support to have a diversity of solutions on the ground where people can choose from, and to provide evidence of impact of those solutions, and also to provide, let's say, evidence on what is needed to make these solutions, and like Folake is indicating, these solutions are still quite local. What is needed to upscale them or to outscale them, and to do research on that. So there's quite a lot that we have to do. As mentioned also by Marie, it can be a scary process because we have to go out of our boundaries, but it's also very challenging and motivating to continue the pathways that we have established or started in our flagship.
So it sounds like we need to embrace the complexity and actually learn to handle it and get the most out of the complex settings that we are working on. We have a few questions that have come in from the audience. The first question is from Eric Boy, and it is specifically addressed to Folake. Folake, what do you recommend to monitor the persistence of new knowledge, the persistence of new knowledge and positively modified practices regarding the consumption of fruits and vegetables? How is long-term impact on behavior maximized and maintained? Tough questions. Over to you, Folake.
Thank you, Eric, for the tough question. Well, I would say beyond the traditional metrics of dietary assessments that we can use to see whether fruits and vegetables consumption has improved, we need to work with proxy metrics, from the supply side, which, when you monitor sales of fruit and vegetable vendors, you can indirectly monitor demand. Another thing we can look at is the uptake of retail innovations by these vendors? Is it being, are these innovations copied in other places? For example, I'll talk about the innovation of the combo of fruits and vegetables right here in Ibadan. In smaller portions and variety of fruits, they are put on a small plate, and this was co-created with the vendors. We're beginning to see signs in study areas beyond, in areas beyond our study area, that this is being copied. These could be some proxy indicators to really tell us whether there's persistence of new knowledge, like you said, for sustainability. And the last thing I would say is that we can also work with existing community structures that will make for sustainability. Existing community structures like faith-based institutions, market associations, schools, and so on and so forth. Once it becomes entrenched in the community structures, then we can easily say that there is persistence of new knowledge in the consumption of fruits and vegetables.
Okay. Thank you very much, Fulake. So I want to link that to a question that has come in from Abdulayalal Musa Aliyu. The question is actually directed to Dr. Sise, but I'm going to quickly link it with what Fulake just said in terms of learning from communities and actually getting an idea from them as part of this co-creation. So Dr. Sise, the question you're being asked is, what challenges have you experienced during the innovation phase of the Secota Declaration? And what I would like to add to that is, what lessons have you picked up perhaps from the communities themselves, as Fulake referred to, perhaps to address some of the challenges that you experienced? Over to you, Dr. Sise.
Thank you so much, Dr. Namukolo. I think there are a number of challenges, but this is also an innovation phase where we also learn by doing. We have been making adjustments as we move along. As we start the Secota Declaration, we have identified 6 potential major challenges that could affect the effective implementation. One is the governance and coordination that was addressed through the program delivery unit. The second one is the community mobilization component. We have 2 tools. That is what we call the community lab and also the first 1,000 days public movement. The third challenge that we anticipated was the data quality and also the data utilization. We are addressed that through the what we call is the data revolution. And also the other one is utilization of technologies and also innovations in the Secota Declaration regions. We are still using them. But while we are also forecasting what challenge could be, but we also experienced some of the challenges which we are still addressing them. For instance, the high level leadership change or transfer or turnover, and also with some political instabilities and insecurities, with those people who have been trained has been moving. Those political leaders that were championing the implementation has been transferred or changed. Such kind of challenges has been there. And also we have done the investment case for the Secota Declaration innovation phase. The mismatch between the budgets that was planned and mobilized both from the government as well as development partners had a huge mismatch. The third is the chronic food insecurity in the community. Around 70% of the population were food insecure when we do the baseline. The minimum dietary diversity was very low, and taking that figure upward and also reducing the food security has been a challenge. And finally, the high level of nutrition illiteracy among the community and also a lot of social behavior change barriers has been a challenge. We have learned now that there are solutions also that could be driven by the community. The community lab process has been an instrumental tool. Utilization of the data for informed decision making based on the learning. Now we are also expanding the UNIS learning, and also the government ownership and also government financing the declaration has been a big success factor And now we are also expanding that. And finally, the learning is women empowerment, engaging women part actively in the entire process and also addressing the challenges that women are facing has been a great learning that we are also taking at scale. We will be hosting the Sakota Declaration also side event at the forum N4G, as I have indicated in the chat box. And maybe if you could want to learn more and contribute in that will be great. We will be inviting also the IFPRI director, John, to be the panel in that forum. And I would also will be also sending an official invitation letter for that. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Namko.
Thank you very much. I would like to encourage you to put something in the chat on the community labs as well. It sounds like an interesting idea that people might want to hear about. There's a question from Bernard Bett, and it is directed to Dr. Rudava. The question is, One Health approaches, which Jeff had introduced on AMR, can be applied to promote resilience and sustainability on food systems. How can this be done on practical terms, especially in the consumption components of food systems? Dr. Rudava.
Thank you very much. I think the One Health component, as we said, that in the consumption component, we have to look at the antimicrobial and other elements. So I think from the production level, when you talk about food safety, not only for human health, we're talking about animal and the planet as well. So from the element of when you talk about private sector, when you talk about human health, the planetary health and the animal health, we need to integrate these in the every processes and measure with key indicators and do evidence-based. So one of the key challenges that we have now, that though we have Food Safety Authority consumer snipes, there is no research that can generate those evidences for us. I think that is why we need, because One Health approach we have been doing, but we have not measured it with critical indicators and with a proper research to generate evidence. So I think this is where we're going to focus as we go forward. If you look at the data element of our UN food system for national pathway and having the multi-stakeholder platform involved in that. So this is one of the areas that we'll focus going forward. Thank you. Over.
So it actually sounds like going forward with this complexity, flexibility is going to be key in how we actually move forward, try things and redirect, look at new evidence, redirect. And so the last question I'm going to take on because of time is, I want to ask Inge. The reason is because you and your colleagues and others in the world that are seeking to help us with evidence to chart path on food systems transformation have a big job to do. Research funding doesn't usually come with flexibility for you to try things and then go a different direction and try something else. So the question is, do you see any route opening up as we talk more about food systems, that there will be some flexibility for you to be able to inform food systems transformation better? What does that landscape look like? Over to you.
Thank you, Namakulo. It's also a challenging question, a very good question. It's very difficult to give an answer on that. What I do see is that there also in the donor world that there's much more co-creation being done. Also, you know, as one donor or as one organization, you cannot address all elements in the food system where evidence is needed or where a solution is needed. So I think collaboration here is another importance that should happen. And I see already that it's going that way, that there are more collaborations between donors, and probably that also will give us opportunities to make, let's say, mistakes, as you say, or failures, because also from the failures you can learn a lot. But the collaboration with donors also as partners and not only as the money givers is extremely important, I think.
Thank you very much. And then to wrap up, dietary guidelines we need to help us with the choices that we need to make, but the guidelines don't work in isolation. The food must be affordable, so affordability must be addressed. And then we have some sectors of the population that are vulnerable for whom government programs are required. And so we've got the Ethiopian example there, but then there's the private sector and the big footprint that they have got on what we actually end up with on the plate. And so we need some help there as well. And then finally, from the researchers, to actually generate the evidence that we require so that all these stakeholders can actually move in the same direction on our transformation towards better diets. And so those are the challenges that you've got to work with in national food systems transformation. And I wish you all well as you endeavor further to actually contribute to these national food systems transformation pathways. And on that, I would like to say thank you very much to all of you, Truong, Falake, Rudava, Inge and Dr. Sise, and over back to you, Janet.
Thank you, Namakolo.
Yeah, thank you, Lamakulo. Yeah, thank you, panelists. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Namakolo.
Yes, and I echo those thanks to Namakolo and to the entire panel and to Inga for her presentation. We definitely learned a lot with that session. We have now come to our third and final panel of the day, and I think you'll see why we held this one until last. Reflecting on what has been discussed through our session, we invite our panelists to discuss opportunities and implications for ongoing and future agricultural research for development programs that are designed to deliver sustainable and healthy diets, promote equity and inclusion, reduce poverty, and protect human health. Our moderator for this session is Hazel Malapit, Senior Research Coordinator at IFPRI, who also has led A4NH's work on gender equity and empowerment. Hazel, we're very much looking forward to this discussion, so I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Janet. And wow, what a tough act to follow. I was, riveted and kind of like lost track of time myself. So thank you everybody for coming to this session. And for this final session, we are very fortunate to have our two distinguished panelists who will share their thoughts on zoning in on what the future looks like for agricultural nutrition health research. We have, of course, Sunita Kadiyala. You've heard from her at the beginning of the session of the entire symposium. She is a professor in nutrition sensitive development at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, LSHTM, and director of the ANH Academy. And then we have Emmy Simmons, who is a member of the global panel on agriculture and food systems for nutrition. Now, before we start, I just want to encourage everyone again in the audience to type in your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will get to them in the second half of this session. Sunita, Emmy, it's a shame we're not here in person, but it's so great to see both of you. And it's wonderful to be having this sort of looking ahead conversation with the two of you, because both of you come with deep knowledge and understanding of the work that A4NH has done over the last 10 years. Sunita, of course, through our partnership with LSHTM and the ANH Academy, and then Emmy as a member of our independent steering committee. So I want...
Oh no. You just blanked.
Uh-oh. All right, let's see. We'll get Hazel back here in just a moment. Yeah. And let me see if in the meantime I have her questions to get us started. Oh, there she is. Okay.
Yes, so maybe let's start with you, Sunita, and then we'll move over to Emmy.
Hazel, I think we missed your question. You had frozen on our end for a moment there.
What's your question?
Oh, sorry about that. I was just saying, that yeah, we want to hear about your reflections on what the research evidence that A4NH along with its partners have produced, and what are some of the things that have been done well that you want to highlight, and what are still some of the key gaps where you think future research should go. So I think we'll start with Sunita and then we'll move on to Emmy.
Thanks, Hazel. We heard this entire afternoon for me and morning for you if you're in the States and elsewhere. We heard quite a lot about the body of work that has been done, the uptake of evidence that has happened in through the A4NH program and its partnerships. And because of the pivotal role that A4NH program has played, along with several other, of course, key global players, we now have a firm understanding on the impacts, opportunities and challenges in making subsistence agriculture nutrition sensitive. A4NH has also been extremely successful, I think, in bringing diverse disciplines into this inquiry of how to make agriculture and now food systems nutrition sensitive. With gender, Hazel, I'm looking at you, Agnes, Ruth, Jemima, and so many others, with gender being one of the key issues that which has really taken off thanks to the leadership that the A4NH team has provided. From a methods and metrics point of view, again, pardon me for putting you in the spot all the time, Hazel and team, VEA to me is an obvious example. Beyond just how to measure women's empowerment through VEA, what the VEA team has done and the indicator has showed is that showcased how robust metrics can be developed and deployed effectively to inform action at scale. And that has led to a whole host of research around how to develop indicators that are robust and inform policy and help monitoring and track impacts. In terms of what I consider are the priority areas of research, gosh, so many of the panelists have mentioned many of the areas before, and I'll try to avoid some of them, but inevitably I'll touch on some of them as well. Based on the Imana evidence and gap map that we had done a year or two ago, and also how the research and the context around us has evolved in the last few years, I'm going to pose about 4 gaps that I think the global community would be interested in. Several players are already looking at some of these issues I'll raise now. So having learned about the impact pathways and what works and the limitations of making subsistence agriculture nutrition sensitive, there are many opportunities, but there are also many challenges, just as we heard from Rolf earlier. So to me, the next logical step is to understand what are the market pathways to nutrition outcomes? How can markets and market level interventions provide affordable and safe diets? An important question then to me is, how can we make supply through the markets and demand meet? And to borrow Marie's phrase, can we push the supply and demand buttons at the same time? My hypothesis is that if we do not address both sides of the equation simultaneously, we are unlikely to achieve optimal nutrition impacts. My second one is somewhat related to markets. So once we say markets are, at least in my ecosystem and several of us, we tend to think of small businesses. But we know that about a dozen agro-food companies dominate the market, ranging from input markets to consumer products. And we need to examine the accountability mechanisms of these big agro-food companies. Well, there is some research on this, including from our school. The agenda is rather big, and I think a lot more can be done by various institutions in a concerted and harmonized way on the issues of commercial determinants of health. Climate change has been alluded to and has been by several speakers before, including Rachel Lambert, and we talked about how the issues of food systems and climate change came together much more forcefully during this COP meeting in Glasgow. But issues of biodiversity, agroecology, soil, water quality, water footprints, and such various dimensions of sustainability are as important. But overall dimensions beyond emissions are not yet adequately addressed, and we need a much more holistic approach to what constitutes sustainability. While I can think of more areas, one of the areas that I really want us to focus on and has been unacceptably neglected both by researchers as well as in the policy is the issue of human rights and food sovereignty. At one point of time in the 1990s, it was fashionable to talk about human rights and nutrition, but not anymore. Food system transformation is being approached rather worryingly as a technocratic solution, and thinking that we can just fix by tinkering at various ends would be a mistake. I must, as I said, I think the issue of human rights, which has been lagging behind in the context of food systems, needs to be much more central. People and their rights, their sovereignty, their agency need to be at the forefront of our research work. Once we focus on people and their rights, I think we'll focus on the planet as these interdependencies become quickly clear. We cannot talk one without the other. That's it for me on this question.
Wow, thank you, Sunita. That's a lot to take in. So, Emmy.
Sorry if I went over time. You didn't give me a time, so
no, that's all right. That's all right. Over to you, Emmy. Your take on research evidence, research priorities.
Thanks, Hazel. This has been just an amazing session. So let me add my voice to that. I also believe that the sort of transition from ag and for nutrition and health to really include agriculture food systems for nutrition and health has been a really positive move over the last decade. It seems that this decade has gone so fast. I just can't believe it. But in terms of things that looking forward, I think we need to really focus on a little bit more are the points that actually Marie and Rolf raised at the beginning, that context matters. I would also add that history matters, that we got where we are for certain reasons. And so looking forward, we have to kind of project where that history is going to go. I think Sunita just mentioned that human rights was kind of really on the hot plate for a while and then kind of moved off. Although I think it came back at the UNFSS, for example. But my couple of points that I think we require greater emphasis are that we actually need to continue to do research, to gather evidence in the real world. It has to be multi-sectoral, interdisciplinary. Many people have emphasized that. But I also want to emphasize that it has to be dynamic. And that means we actually need to start doing more modeling. Not just doing the metrics of what's happening today and saying, oh, we want to move this from here to there in 5 years, but really look at this sort of long-term dynamics of how markets have grown, how they've penetrated into rural areas, how populations have grown, what's the impact on soil and soil degradation and demand for water. We have a lot of questions in the food system that are really long-term and dynamic, and we need to start figuring out how to model those better. I think modeling also needs to be done, as I think the last panel emphasized, at the national level, but I would add the subnational level, because even in Nigeria, okay, vegetables are probably eaten everywhere in Nigeria, but I worked in northern Nigeria for many years where the main vegetable consumed was baobab leaves. I don't think baobab leaves are a big vegetable item in Ibadan, but nevertheless, I think it requires us to take into account some of that local context at the subnational level and to do that kind of dynamic modeling that we need to do. 50 years ago, in northern Nigeria, people were eating a lot of locust beans made into a condiment, and then the roads were widened and all those locust bean trees were cut down. So it's that kind of history matters, understanding how change is happening, and that does require, as I think our last panel so brilliantly sort of emphasized, that we need to have national teams who know the context, but also push them, as I think several people were, to how could it be different? Where is it going to go as populations grow, as climate change happens, as breakdowns in governance occur, and so forth. I also want to emphasize environmental costing. I've read several recently in all the climate change COP26 run-up. There have been a number of articles and talks and Zoom calls on sort of the need to invest more in adaptation to climate change, but also to mitigate climate change. Mitigation is going to cost money and it's going to cost resources. And if that mitigation is going to actually happen, it's going to affect the cost of food. And I know right now many governments are looking at the cost of staple crops. But again, as the discussion today has emphasized, it's not just staple crops, it's fruits, it's vegetables. If in fact there's in fact costs for carbon, there's cost for cold stores, there's cost for transport. And those are going to have to be paid by somebody. And the question is, are they going to be paid by consumers? So I think we really need to take a much more forward-looking and much more hard-nosed look at what this climate change is going to cost in terms of loss, yes, but also just in terms of adding to the challenging issue of affordability, which so many speakers have emphasized.
Thank you, Emmy. So this is really, I mean, quite a lot of potential sort of areas that we should focus on. And I just kind of wanted to pick up on something you were touching on, Emmy, about sort of providing real guidance to decision makers, having these subnational teams embedded in context. It sounds very much like partnerships and communications would be really critical to making sure research is making an impact. So how can we do this better? What would you advise? And I don't know, Emmy, if you wanted to come back on that first, and then we reverse the order and go back to Sunita in the end.
Sounds good to me. Okay with
Yes.
you, Sunita? Yeah. I think that's an excellent question. And I go to one of the themes that's been raised by others is the impact of COVID. I think what we've learned in this COVID experience is that in fact, we in fact around the world, high income, low income, middle income countries, all share certain common issues and challenges with regard to health, with regard to healthcare. I think the same is true of food systems and health and nutrition. I think that several people have mentioned that it's not just about hunger, it's also about overweight and obesity. I would expect if we had Rachel talking a bit longer, she would have talked more about vegetables and micronutrients. I think right now the world has changed and COVID has really kind of pushed this one globe kind of thing, not just one health, but one globe, one food system, and that we need the research and evidence to bridge, you know, what we're learning about, for example, obesity and overweight in high income countries like the US, and that emergence of overweight and obesity in middle income countries that we're seeing. I think the COVID lesson has also told us given a new impetus to public leadership, and the fact that public leaders need to know what they're talking about, and they need to give consistent messages to the population. People have emphasized behavior, BCC, and knowledge, nutrition education at the local level, but it's also sort of projecting those lessons from the leadership level, that we want people to be healthy, we want people to eat well, we want diets to be safe, to be nutritious. And so that message, I think, needs to be a message that comes from the top, is continually repeated, and is carried out through public sector programs. People have mentioned school feeding, absolutely. People have mentioned market and market regulation, absolutely. And so I think it's that public thing, that public role that in fact the COVID has sort of highlighted for us. On the other hand, people have talked about private sector and the fact that the private sector has such a big footprint and such a big role in the way that food systems work everywhere from the village level to the global corporations. And I think that is an area that we really also need to take on in terms of nutrient density of foods, in terms of nutritional quality, the access to nutrition index. But we also need to really focus on the fact that many of the problems, and this was emphasized by Falake, are actually on perishable products. And that, again, requires investment. It requires investment in roads, it requires investment in cold chains, it requires investments in packaging. And until we kind of really align those private sector incentives and that private sector innovation with the need for nutrient-dense food products at affordable prices, appealing at the market level, I think we're not going to make all that much progress. So people have talked about bringing in the private sector, and that's right on.
Yeah, thanks, Emmy. Sunita, your thoughts on partnerships and communications?
And so you started the question by saying the previous panel said there has to be a team embedded here or there. And I just would like to take that point of it's not for us to embed anyone, right? We know how Iraq war unfolded by embedding people. So I just feel that what we need as a global community is to be the enablers and facilitators of that change to happen wherever that needs to happen. Change needs to happen in the UK, the US, Latin America, India, where else? And I think what we need is a system where we think differently about our partnerships, about our research agendas, who sets the research agendas, so on and so forth. As we know, therefore I'm going to segue a little bit, and I agree with everything Emmy has said, so I won't repeat some of those points, but I thought I would give a separate perspective in terms of borrowing from what we are doing around our schools and so on and so forth in terms of the decolonization agenda. Right, so the idea of equitable partnerships and playing this enabling role really requires us to embrace this decolonizing research and even in teaching and fostering equitable partnerships. In the last 2 years, of course, we have seen a lot of impetus in how we think about this, both from different partners, and A4NH has been definitely, and CGIAR have been some of the key thinkers around these topics as well. In the ANH Academy, for example, we are trying to see, okay, how can you operationalize this agenda of decolonizing research and teaching? And of course, you will hear more from us on that. What I see currently is the issue of, and we have been thinking quite a lot about it in terms of what plagues our system is we consult people, and we say we have talked to various stakeholders in various countries, we convene, then we go back, we have a research program, and then we label this as co-design. Then our partners who are in charge of executing this research of the program that we have come up with, they're executing research almost always without equitable say in terms of research governance and decision making and so on and so forth. This is of course changing, but I think it is changing at a glacial pace. So to me, continuing with the table metaphor, which I think most of you have been involved in some form or fashion at the UN Food Systems Summit leading up to that, I'm going to continue with the table metaphor and say that asking the question of who is at the table, that is diversity and representation, is important, but it is not good enough anymore. But what is on the table is important, even if what is on the table is not what we are used to, and it is radically different. And that is because we, I think, tend to recognize and reward people who are like us, and to recognize values and various ways of working, thinking, executing, decision-making, different forms of knowledge and its production in the scientific enterprise is urgently needed. We really do need to understand people who are not like us. And I mean, it could be an anthropologist from a LSH team. I need to understand that person, or a private sector entrepreneur in India. So we need to think about different ways in understanding each other. So for me, as we sit in institutes in high-income countries, we need to confront and accept the past of our history, and history has come up even in this discussion. And we have to accept that we have been a part of harming or damaging, or at the very least, being bystanders to some of the scientific enterprise, or stymieing the scientific enterprise in many of these countries. So I do think we need to discuss and step up our game on that. We are currently still at the point of curating class reading lists and authorships on our paper. And these are an important first step and an important low-hanging fruit. But I think the change has to come from a structural level. We need to reimagine what leadership looks like. And us, the leaders, or the current leaders label, quote unquote, we need to think differently, or they need to think differently, and be wanting to share or seed some of that. And to do that, we need, I think, humility to get us there, and a lot of, discussing, thinking, and walking this journey together.
Wow, thank you, Sunita. I mean, I think this is a brilliant kind of point to end on, this notion of equitable partnerships and focusing on our role as enablers. We thought this was like, you know, really critical issue to end on. And unfortunately, this means that we lost track. I lost track of time. So apologies to those of you who've put in comments and questions that we didn't get to. But please know that there is still the chat function. So if either of you, Emmy or Sunita, would like to respond to that, I think Chris Bene has a question. So please go ahead and do so. So I'll pass back on. So thank you both for giving us a lot of food for thought, and back to Janet, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Emmy, for meeting you finally. Thanks.
Yes, thank you to Hazel and Sunita and to Emmy for those really interesting insights. We've covered a lot of ground today, and we can't think of two more appropriate individuals to summarize all that's been discussed and bring our session to a close than the two speakers I'm about to introduce. I'd like to welcome back Jeff Bage, Chair of the 2021 A&H Academy Scientific Committee, and John McDermott of A4NH, Director of A4NH since the program's inception in 2012. Those familiar with A4NH and A&H Academy know well how instrumental Jeff and John have been to establishing these programs and charting the course that's made them into what we know today. So it seemed only right, as A4NH draws to a close, that we invite them to take a moment to reflect on what they've heard today and what they've seen over the years. Jeff, can I turn first to you?
Sure, thanks very much, Janet. Wow, what an interesting event. So much new stuff I didn't even know about has come out of this fantastic program. And thanks for the invitation to celebrate A4NH and reflect on its progress. I'm particularly pleased this event has been co-organized by A4NH and the Academy, as it epitomizes the cooperation of leading programs from both the agriculture and the public health sector in this area. I celebrate those long-standing links that these two initiatives have had. As John points out, it's been a long and wonderful journey. I'm going to offer briefly a historical reflection. History seems to be on the agenda at the moment, but I think history can be an important resource when planning dramatic change in the research system, and that is certainly now happening in the CGIAR. So let me begin with the institutional reorganization of the CGIAR, but in 2008, this year. I was a member of the design team for proposing a new structure for the CG led by Joachim von Braun, and we were tasked, amongst other things, with coming up with an idea for how a cross-CGIAR initiative in agriculture, nutrition, and health could be created. And I remember this as being very challenging. The CGIAR then, even more than now, is a collection of highly commodity-focused centers, eco-regional centers, a few other beasts. It was hard to build a program on nutrition and healthy diets without a strong integration of research across all these commodity areas and regions. But such inter-center coordination was not a strong historical feature of the CGIAR. There were obvious CGIAR elements to include, including IFPRI's work on nutrition, as Maria has pointed out, the then quite young Harvest Plus program on biofortification, the SIP program on sweet potatoes, both destined to make outstanding progress in improving nutritional quality of staple foods. And of course, ILRI, with the potential to address both key micronutrient demands and key health issues related to zoonoses, and World Fish for some of the same reasons. But the prospects of getting all CG centers contributing their commodities, farming systems, and integrated nutrition and health approach seemed remote. And as some of you who here will remember, the CGIAR restructuring process took quite a few twists and turns, but eventually the CRPs emerged, including A4NH. And to its credit, the first phase of A4NH did bring together a really broad church of CGIAR centers. And while our activities began with member centers pretty much turning up and doing their own thing in nutrition and health and telling each other about it, A4NH gradually provided an opportunity to share experiences, to build new relationships, to start new dialogues. And it drew in all of John McDermott's outstanding skills as a herder of cats, and it succeeded in building some key common approaches and processes for agriculture, nutrition, health, and the CGIAR. And I'd say by the end of that first phase, by the middle of the last decade, all CG centers, whether they participated in A4NH or not, were busily thinking about agriculture, nutrition, and health, and could draw upon the framework that A4NH was building. But it was its second phase, about 2015-ish, in the second half of its decade that A4NH, reorganized now around flagships with expanded external partnerships, really took off. In my view, and many have said this today, I think it did this by building and promoting a clear food system approach to the A4NH research agenda, anticipating a global trend in this perspective and considering much more the issues of food value chains, actors, markets, consumers, and the environment, as well as the more traditional production side approach. And then made food safety a key element of A4NH as a result, just at a time when evidence of its importance to health in low and middle income countries emerged. There were a lot of really big, good timing issues. And not only did A4NH support substantial changes in agricultural research and its approach to nutrition and health, but it also had begun to contribute to changes in public health research thinking as well. In that sector, there's always been a disconnect between a research community that works on agriculture as a source of disease and a quite different community that works on agriculture as a source of nutrition. And A4NH, with its food system focus, has helped to begin dismantling these silos as well, helping public health side to come together in a more integrated and holistic manner to work with its agriculture and food counterparts. So what about the future? Well, the CG has now established through A4NH, I think, an outstanding international science platform for developing agriculture and food systems for nutrition and health. The centers are well resourced and placed for continuing this effort. Good timing and staying at the front of trends has been a key feature of A4NH's success. So keeping the agriculture, nutrition, and health momentum in one CGIAR is critical, I think. The CGIAR also has a unique access to a community of thousands of researchers in this area, supported by the ANH Academy, with whom with whom they can build the external partnerships that have proven to be so important to achieving the success of A4NH itself. Continuing the agriculture, nutrition, and health agenda in CG will require close inter-center collaboration as always. We've seen that this is challenging, that it takes a very long time to develop. It should not be taken for granted and not let go of. It should continue, I think. Such collaboration internally and externally involves not only imagination, innovation, but a great deal of trust and tolerance and humility. And I'm sure it is possible. And I hope that the next reincarnation of the CGIAR can build on A4NH and go on to make an even greater contribution to nutrition and health. And with that, I turn over to you, John.
Thanks, Jeff. And it's great to be doing this with you. We've been co-conspirators for 10 years, and you're really the one person who understands what I need to do, and I think what you needed to do over the years. So it's been great. It's been wonderful to listen to all these reflections about learning and future implications. And first, I'd just like to appreciate the symposium team from the ANH Academy and A4NH. And you've met some of them. So Janet's here. You've met Joe, who made an intervention. You probably interacted with Abel. And Sunita and I have been here, but there's one person you haven't seen who's actually led the development and thinking behind the symposium and put it together, and that's Amanda Wyatt. And so I'd just like to recognize Amanda and her contribution. You know, a lot's been said, so maybe I'll just give three kind of personal reflections on what I've heard. The first is around research. And I started in development in the early 1980s. And I went into research because I realized that in development, we didn't know what we wanted to do or how to do it. And there was a real role for research. I was involved in, I thought, a pretty bad rural development project. I mean, it had good intentions and things, but I mean, we needed to understand a lot better, to think about processes and be more systematic. So that's been, I think, one of the great parts of A4NH is the rigorous research. And you heard about a lot of these things. And one of the nice things about working at the intersection of different sectors, agriculture, nutrition, and health, is that it allows you to draw research methods from different angles. So from biology, we have agriculture, we have health, we have genetics, we have all kinds of stuff. We've had a lot of economics, which is absolutely crucial to the decision making. And I think even more important, we've had a lot of social science. And this is crucial, as we've learned, in health and in all kinds of sectors. So that's been a great strength. I think the other thing is, because we're dealing with big problems, we need a kind of critical mass of research. We need a portfolio of research that really links up and does things. And we've had that luxury, and I really appreciate it over the 10 years of doing that. And to be able to really give useful evidence around efficacy, program implementation, cost effectiveness, food system monitoring, a lot of things that you've heard about. It's been really satisfying. And I think that's been especially useful for program implementers, for policymakers, and for investors. So that's kind of on the research side. I think research is important. That's why I got involved in it, and I'm pleased with how that's gone. There are gaps. On the partnerships, that's really how we're going to have impacts. And the demands are huge, and we need to accelerate and expand partnerships. And the approach we've had with implementers and enablers, if we're going to tackle some of the key challenges. And I think you heard about, or kind of appreciated, two of them from the symposium today. One that Rachel noticed, and I think the biggest regret I have is that we didn't do more focused and systematic work with vulnerable populations. And I have worked with pastoralist populations for decades, in the early parts of my career, and I know how tough it is in these places. And we've learned a lot from the kind of COVID disruptions, and these vulnerable populations are up against all kinds of intersecting problems: conflicts, climate, food crises, health problems. Now, there's a lot that our work can inform and help with on the nutrition and health side. And it can make a much greater contribution to, I think, what we understand post-COVID, which is we really need to support much more comprehensively the basic needs of vulnerable populations, and we haven't done that. But it's going to take a partnership that hasn't really come together yet, which is between the humanitarian and the development sectors, and over kind of longer term trajectories. I mean, we're not going to change the Sahel in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. And it's going to take humanitarian interventions and development interventions and how they come together. And you're going to have to work closely with those communities affected, because none of us appreciate their realities in the way that they do. The second and related to that is on the challenges of food system transformation. And I think we've taken the approach that these processes need to be owned and led by national actors, and that one of the big issues they're facing is how do they bring together the national actors in their countries, public and private, et cetera, and how do we do that? The coalitions, so a lot of the pathways that Inga talked about. And I think international research has begun to understand or appreciate the importance of context, of of local people driving the agenda. But as Sunita eloquently said, we have a long way to go there. But I think this is going to be the crucial thing. And the way I would phrase it is to say that we need to act like we really believe this. And like, it's just not going to happen if it's not the national partners that do that. And I think it should be obvious from the discussions we've heard that we cannot navigate the context that's important to do this, or prevent the killer mistakes that are going to stop things from happening without local ownership and leadership at whatever is the most appropriate level. So I just, that's been something I've been reflecting on listening today. And the last one is about the future and just the capacity to learn and adapt, and appreciating. I fear that our research is always behind. The world is changing fast, and the low and middle income countries are changing at a kind of unprecedented rate. I mean, one we've never seen before in human history, how fast they're changing. And take Vietnam, where Dr. Mai is, or Bangladesh or Nigeria or Ethiopia, just unbelievable change in certainly in my lifetime. Like it's just staggering. And how, we need to look forward, and we need to help policymakers and others with evidence. Emmy touched on this, the importance of really helping people to look at the future, because the future is like the day after, or it's next week or the week after. It's so fast. And that's going to require a lot of capabilities, resources, understanding of political economy, a lot of things that are just emerging now. So those are just kind of reflections in the air of research partnerships in the future a little bit from what I heard. And there was a great discussion today. It was really great. I'd just like to close off by appreciating some of the partners that we've worked with over the years. And I think one of the partnership successes, we've had a kind of common purpose, and we've all shared that. And there's been a lot of goodwill, and we've inspired each other. We've made working together fun, and I think that's critical to that. We're very fortunate that some of the ideas, like the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health Academy that we dreamed about 10 years ago, actually far exceeded our expectations, Jeff. It's just been amazing. And what that means for the next generation of researchers is something dear to both our hearts. Is great. And it's just so exciting. So on my side, in terms of A4NH, I would like to appreciate the Planning and Management Committee of A4NH, the managing partners and the flagship leaders and the cross-cutting units who've really worked well together. You've made the program, you've made the institutional relationships work. That's been fantastic. I would like to appreciate our Independent Science Committee, who's given us fantastic advice over the 10 years and kindly and persistently nudged me to do things, repeating them sometimes 2 or 3 times to get them. But that's been great. And then finally, a big thanks to the Program Management Unit. So there's Amanda, Tigist, Janet, Namakulo, Devesh, and Hazel, who you've met some of them today. They have been, they've made a fantastic team. They've just supported me incredibly. And I don't think I've ever been as helpless in any job without my team as this one. So that's a reflection of how important you are. And I guess I won't have very many public opportunities to thank you. So this is one. So I just wanted to thank, I can't thank everybody enough for, and all the funders and the different people who've helped us over time. But these are a bit more personal reflections, I guess, rather than official programmatic ones. So thank you.
Thank you, John. And I can't think of a better way to wrap up our session for today. We're so grateful to you and to Jeff, not only for your thoughts today, but for your leadership and your vision over the years. I'd also like to extend thanks to all of our presenters and panelists and moderators and participants today. And on behalf of the A4NH team, I'm offering special thanks to our ANH Academy colleagues, not only for hosting this session, but for your wonderful partnership over the years. While A4NH is coming to an end, the work carries on, and CGIAR looks forward to continued collaborations with you in the future as we work together toward our global development goals. So finally, I'd like to thank all who are with us here today. Your questions and comments truly added to a rich discussion, and I hope you found it as informative as I did and as inspiring. With that, we come to a close, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks again.